Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and we have a World War III alert. We got a World War III alert, but before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. We cannot be distracted by all of the chaos that the CIA and the small hats are causing. We do have to pay attention that World War III is definitely on the table, and Trump is being boxed in. There's no favorable deal that he will ever get in the Ukraine situation. It's all bad news in Ukraine. That's why it's getting very dangerous in the United States. The money laundering must stop in Ukraine.
A few days ago, during his speech to Russian and Western journalists, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made a statement that caused a real shock in the West. In particular, he officially stated that Russia would not agree to a truce in Ukraine if all of Russia's conditions were not met. At the moment, considering what the West...
See, there's no deal for Trump to get except for total surrender. Zelensky probably hang from the neck if they don't get him out of there ASAP. No NATO, no European boots, any talk like that, it just be total war.
West is offering us a decision on an armistice in Ukraine would be a
President Putin already said he haven't even started the war yet. He said he ain't even did 30% of what war really look like. So this is a special military operation. If they want war, then don't accept his terms in Ukraine. That's what he told them.
Road to nowhere. Russia will never be satisfied with empty talk about resolving the current conflict. You must finally understand that Russia only needs final legal agreements that will comply with all of Moscow's conditions regarding Russia's security and the legitimate security interests of its allies and neighbors. At the same time, in an international legal way, this document should establish the impossibility of violating these agreements. We must be sure that in the future, even the new leaders of Western countries will not be able to violate the agreements reached, Sergei Lavrov said. At the same time, the head of Russian diplomacy hinted that even the Trump administration, which allegedly wants the end of the war in Ukraine so much, does not hide the fact that a ceasefire in this Eastern European country is only necessary for the West in order to buy time to continue pumping Kiev with weapons. Moreover, just a couple of hours after this statement by the head of Russian diplomacy, influential Russian politician and State Duma deputy, Mikhail Shirmat, officially stated that if the West, and in particular Ukraine, want the long-awaited peace, they will have to accept all the conditions of the Russian Federation. At the same time, he stressed that in order to start peace negotiations with Russia, Ukraine will have to get rid of the illegitimate President Vladimir Zelensky and his gang, who have usurped power in this country. For Russia, Vladimir Zelensky and other representatives of the Kiev regime are ordinary citizens of Ukraine, who are illegally in power. Moscow will never negotiate with these bandits, much less, Moscow will never sign any documents with them, Mikhail Shirmat said.
That's a fact. He's a bandit, a criminal. You know, look at him as his equal.
My dear truth seekers, these official statements by Sergei Lavrov and Mikhail Shirmat have caused a real shock in the West. Immediately after that, many Western experts and analysts said that Russia had actually issued an ultimatum to the West, making it clear that the war in Ukraine would end only on Moscow's terms, and that there would be no freezing of the conflict according to the Cyprus or Korean scenario. In particular, commenting on Sergei Lavrov's words, an authoritative American military expert, retired Lieutenant Colonel of the U.S. Army, Daniel Davis, said that Moscow had officially refused Donald Trump's peace plan. According to him, many in Washington do not want to admit the fact that Ukraine suffered a crushing defeat in the confrontation with Russia. Ukraine has lost this war and Kiev's surrender is just a matter of time. Daniel Davis noted that representatives of the Trump administration continue to talk to Moscow from a position of threats and blackmail, pretending that Russia is not the winner in this conflict. In particular, one of Donald Trump's closest associates, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who is considered the creator of the so-called Trump's Ukraine peace plan, made it clear that the 47th President of the United States wants to force Russia to come to the negotiating table through the so-called carrot and stick motivation.
Force Russia, yeah, right.
Analyzing Keith Kellogg's words, it becomes clear that Donald Trump wants Moscow to keep the territories currently under the control of the Russian army, but only on condition that Vladimir Putin agrees to peace talks. In addition, Donald Trump also wants to delay Ukraine's accession to NATO for 10-15 years.
Nah, it won't be no NATO.
However, at the same time, the pressure on Russia would not stop, and the West would continue to supply Ukraine with tanks, missiles, infantry fighting vehicles, multiple launch rocket systems, and even combat planes. In addition, this so-called peace plan also provides for deploying one of the NATO member countries' peacekeeping contingent in the territory of Ukraine. According to Daniel Davis, Russia will never agree to such conditions, and will not allow the United States to blackmail itself, and talk from a position of strength. The retired Lieutenant Colonel of the U.S. Army noted that Russia is the winner in this conflict, and that the Trump administration will have to agree to all of Moscow's terms. In particular, Moscow demands that Kiev and Washington officially recognize the Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk regions as an integral part of the Russian Federation.
Recognize the power.
Moreover, Moscow also requires that the Ukrainian army voluntarily leave the northern parts of the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. In addition, Moscow demands that the United States publicly declare that Ukraine would never join NATO. Of course, all these Russian demands are unacceptable not only for Washington, but also for Kiev. If Washington publicly agrees to these terms, it will be considered an official recognition of the humiliating defeat of the United States and the entire collective West. However, the worst thing for the Trump administration is that Russia absolutely does not care about these negotiations, as the Russian army continues its victorious offensive in all key directions of the front, and Moscow will achieve all its goals in any case. This suggests that if the West, led by the United States, refuses to accept Moscow's terms, then Russian troops will continue the systematic destruction of the Ukrainian army, as a result of which even more territories will be under Moscow's control. By the way, Russian President Vladimir Putin also stated this. Let me remind you that back in September last year, Vladimir Putin said that if the West and Ukraine do not agree to Russia's terms, Kiev's territorial losses will become much greater. And by that time, Moscow's conditions would have become much tougher. Simply put, the Russian leader made it clear that if the West, led by the United States, does not agree to Moscow's terms, then a country like Ukraine would cease to exist. Thus, Donald Trump will have to make a difficult decision: either he will agree to Moscow's terms, or his administration will have to watch silently as Russia systematically continues to annihilate the Ukrainian army, taking control of the southern, central, and northern parts of Ukraine. In any case, whatever happens, it is safe to say that Russia has become the main winner of this confrontation between the West and the East.
But BlackRock can't accept that. See, that's why terrorists are striking in the U.S. and terrorists are striking in front of Trump Tower, because BlackRock cannot accept losing the other $12 trillion that Zelensky is sitting on. Remember, Putin already took $10 trillion. He owned that land. Now he want them to sign the documents to say that's over don't even worry about that 10 trillion ever again. But what he's warning them is, if you don't tap out right now, then I'm going to seize the rest of the land with the rest of the resources too.
The 119th Congress just started their session, and they're already trying to sneak in a clause to protect Netanyahu from international accountability. In a resolution recently introduced by the 119th Congress, they threatened to impose sanctions on the International Criminal Court for any effort to investigate, arrest, detain, or prosecute any person the United States considers an ally. And we know this is specifically referring to Netanyahu for a couple of reasons. First of all,
they just tried to put in writing the good old boy system that they've been had. If you down with the U.S., the International Criminal Court will never investigate you. You could be a war criminal. You could be the country of France and terrorize Africa, steal all their resources, rape, pillage, plunder, commit way more crimes than Germany was thinking about doing. France been doing. That's a motherfucker fact. Committing genocides for decades in Africa. That's a fact. Terrorizing them, stealing all their resources. That's a fact. But the U.S. is letting International Criminal Court in the world know now. They finna put it in legal documents. The Congressional Black Coons, these people is so shameful. They don't give a fuck about nobody but they got themselves. That nobody can be investigated if you're down with the U.S. That's disgusting.
First of all, we know Netanyahu has an international arrest warrant initiated by the International Criminal Court as of November 21st, 2024. Second of all, Thomas Massie actually took to Twitter to tell the entire world that Congress was trying to sneak in this clause in the House rules package, and it was specifically about the International Criminal Court and Netanyahu. And I know in that tweet, Thomas Massie says that the United States is allegedly a sovereign nation.
That's disgusting, bro, because they already know the International Criminal Court don't do nothing but bully African leaders and then indict Putin because the U.S. said so. That's the so the Congressional Black Coons, they supposed to be standing up. Not this white man, Thomas Massie, by himself. The Congressional Black Caucus supposed to be sick and tired of African leaders being tortured and terrorized by the International Criminal Court. Is an imperialist, racist court, and they're trying to put it in writing that racism will live forever. Disgusting.
Shit. I can't tell the way that our politicians stay bending over for Israel, and just look at the verbiage of this clause. They make it explicitly clear that they're not concerned with innocence or guilt. They don't even want the International Criminal Court to investigate the United States allies.
That's crazy.
The United States Congress is actively advocating for international lawlessness. The same United States that just overthrew or helped to overthrow the Syrian government because of claims that Assad was engaging in lawless behavior. The same Congress that is constantly accused Putin of engaging in international lawlessness. But if you and your allies are not doing anything wrong, why would you have a problem with a justice system, an international justice system, simply investigating whether or not you're guilty? And I'm sure the answer to that is because if you investigate, you find answers. And when those answers are found, the international community knows exactly how evil you are, because that's exactly what happened with the International Criminal Court and Netanyahu. And the genocide Netanyahu and Israel are committing right now as we speak in Gaza. But in my opinion, this isn't even just about Netanyahu. They're also trying to protect another person who's probably going to end up being investigated when everything is said and done in Ukraine. And that man would be Zelensky. I mean, considering Zelensky has literally sent his soldiers to prop up terrorists all over the world at this point, it's safe to assume that the United States is...
This guy is the terrorist who blew up the vehicle in front of Las Vegas, who's been working with Zelensky in Ukraine. He had just left Germany and came on his final mission. That's if the man not got a new identity in somewhere else after a little terrorist event he pulled off. But see, people is tying all this together.
Scared that once this war has ended, Zelensky could be on the chopping block on the ICC. And if they investigate Zelensky, the world will know just how involved in the corruption that took place in Ukraine the United States was. And we know they can't have that. But it isn't just Netanyahu and Zelensky that this would affect potentially, but any of the United States allies going forward. Basically, if their allies commit war crimes, they want them to be protected by the United States and unaccountable to the rest of the world. But if the United States accuses somebody of committing a war crime, they want the rest of the world to be okay with the United States and its allies overthrowing said government. I know the United States Congress has been an embarrassment for probably longer than I've been alive. But to try to sneak in a law that would officially protect war criminals only because they're your allies, that's a new low entirely. And most of us wouldn't even have known if Thomas Massie didn't pull the mask off, which is even sadder.
That's sad because the Congressional Black Caucus is too busy shining shoes to speak up about white supremacy being placed in the supreme law. And we know that the International Criminal Court has been a white supremacist court. They've only been targeting African leaders. That's all they've been talking, and they finally decided to go after Putin, and they finally decided to go after Netanyahu, which is a political thing they're doing. But now the U.S. is saying, hell no, you're not going to be going after no Putin or no Netanyahu. We told you go after them niggas, and then go after Russia because we say they are a mixture of people. So they some European Asian niggas, and we don't like them neither.
None of our liberal progressive allies decide to speak out against this. And this is why people are talking revolution now instead of voting your way out of this. Because there's no voting your way out of a Congress that wants to protect war criminals committing a genocide. And when voting in peaceful resolution is not possible, we all know what's inevitable. And let's just be honest, they probably got it coming.
Let's waste no time. The Oracle has arrived in the studio. It's Chris Hedges, and I'm very glad to wish you, Chris, a Happy New Year. Glad you spent it with us here on the Mother of All Talk shows. My condolences to the people of New Orleans who have suffered in the early hours of the morning a terrorist atrocity, which on the face of it appears to be yet another murderous attack emanating from the alphabet soup of extremism of the ISIS, Al-Qaeda variety. Unless you can tell me any differently by updating me, that's how it currently looks. Your views on it, please.
I don't know why anyone's surprised after a year of genocidal assault in which not only are Western countries like the United States complicit, but have embraced the role of essentially arming and sustaining the genocide. It's, you know, what the CIA calls blowback. So I think every day that the genocide continues in Gaza, it's just another advertisement for the hypocrisy of the racism, the callousness of Western nations such as the United States. So supposedly there was an ISIS flag found in the truck. It was, you know, it would only happened a few hours ago, but it seems to point to an extremist attack by a jihadist, or at least somebody who identified with jihadist groups. But I don't know why anyone's surprised. I mean, this is what happens. They don't, you know, people who stand up to Western countries like the United States, or if you want to look at a sophisticated military like Israel, they don't have an air force. They don't they will use the cruder forms of trucks, box cutters, whatever, suicide vests. But yeah, I think this is a harbinger of what's coming.
Yeah, but I get the point that you're making. The United States is in full-scale complicity and direct involvement, in fact, in Sana'a in Yemen yesterday. British and American aircraft were killing Yemenis all over again. I get that point. But what about the apparent contradiction that your government and mine are fully behind the ISIS al-Qaeda front now running Syria, yet an ISIS al-Qaeda type fanatic is murdering Americans in New Orleans? How do we square that?
Well, I think that's part of the ineptitude of, in particular, U.S. foreign policy. So Jimmy Carter just died. It was Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski, his national security advisor, who dreamt up the foolish idea of destroying the government in Kabul, provoking a Soviet invasion in 1979, and then spending $3 billion of U.S. money and several billion dollars of Saudi money to create the Taliban, which created al-Qaeda. And again, you look at the Syrian conflict, we were arming these groups. I think it's $500 million in arms. They call them the quote unquote moderate rebels. So those contradictions are not new. And in fact, there was a moment in the Syrian conflict when we realized that arms had been passed into jihadist groups that were completely hostile to us and to the project in Iraq, and they began to bomb them. There was the U.S. warplanes were bombing them. So functioning as kind of Assad's de facto air force, it just is part of the whole folly of empire. And yes, you make an extremely good point. These are the people who now control. These are the people who control Syria.
Let me give you some breaking news, Chris. Reuters are reporting that the former Israeli Defense Minister, Gallant, is resigning from parliament. He was fired from the government in November after months of disagreement over the conduct of the war, but he kept his seat as an elected member of the Knesset. Now, tonight, he has resigned from parliament, presumably leaving politics. There was an emergency operation on Netanyahu himself this week. What's going on inside Israel in your view?
It's Netanyahu's consolidation of power. Remember, Gallant was favored by the United States in particular to replace Netanyahu. And Netanyahu, especially with the incursion into Lebanon, the strikes that have been carried out in Syria to degrade what's left of the Syrian military, the occupation of the buffer zone, so-called buffer zone on the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory, including Mount Hermon. Now we see pictures on social media of Israelis skiing on Mount Hermon. This has made Netanyahu wildly popular. Netanyahu's hold on power immediately after October 7th was very precarious. He needed figures like Gallant. He doesn't need them anymore. So I think it's an indication of Netanyahu's strength within Israel.
Now, going back to the U.S., Donald Trump will be along in a minute. He's going to have a number of problems to deal with on the international level. If we could seriatim go through them, starting rather with the Middle East in the wake of what would appear to be an ISIS Al-Qaeda terror outrage in the US, and maybe two. We don't know who blew up the Tesla cyber truck outside Trump's hotel in Las Vegas. The instinct of Donald Trump would be to take a hammer to the hornet's nest that is the Idlib nest of these terrorist organizations. And if he does, those that he doesn't kill will spill around the world, posing a danger to all of us. What do you think he's likely to do first in relation to Syria?
I mean, that is the big unknown. What will he do in Syria? He tends to be driven by events. So what happened in New Orleans, tends to provoke a reaction. It's often not particularly well thought out. I think we don't know. We don't know how he's going to handle Syria. Is he going to make the connections that, are obvious, the ones that you have made, tying ISIS and these groups to the current Syrian government and Golani? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that is, yeah. And Trump is impulsive. And so he's very hard to predict.
Yeah. How are things in the MAGA camp? There was a Donnybrook going on the last time I looked between Steve Bannon, who represents the blue flame of MAGA, put America first, and so on, and more globalist, more cosmopolitan elements like Elon Musk. Has that been solved? Has Trump stepped in? Or are we seeing a major fissure inside MAGA before Trump even gets back in the door?
I think it is a major fissure. I mean, Trump stepped in on the immigrant visas because, of course, high-tech companies want them. Tesla wants them. Musk brings in skilled workers from overseas on foreign visas. The MAGA base is hostile to the importation of immigrants to take jobs, especially high-tech jobs. But I don't think contradictions within MAGA is particularly new. I think the entire movement has been riven with contradictions, the most egregious being this kind of faux populism that Trump peddles, and then his subservience to the billionaire class and Wall Street. I used to say you can't vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs. It doesn't matter who you vote for. And Trump had Goldman Sachs employees in high positions in his administration, just as Obama and Biden and everyone else does. And Trump comes out of that world. He comes out of that world of high finance. But yes, I think you're right that there are contradictions. How stark will those fissures become, and what will that mean? I don't know. But I think those fissures have always been there.
Staying in the US for a minute, I don't know if you watched it. I commend it to you and the viewers. The new, it's on Disney, the new documentary Beatles 64, which talks about the invasion of the United States by the 4 Liverpool young men in 1964. It's a phenomenal documentary, but it opens with a kind of extended eulogy to President Kennedy. The Beatles arrived just not long after the murder of Kennedy in Dallas. In my view, a coup d'etat. And I got to wondering as I watched and dried a tear, how far we've come and how far down we have sunk. From Jack Kennedy to Joe Biden and Donald Trump is a very long way. Are there any possibilities of the Democratic Party in the United States? Are they showing any signs of introspection, of intellectual search for renaissance? Or are they just a busted flush, in your opinion?
No, that's what's been so disturbing. Their whole post-mortem has been looking at or blaming anybody but themselves. So it's because Biden didn't drop out early enough. It's because Harris, didn't message properly. It's all about messaging and all about gimmicks. It's not about the fundamental issue, which is that the Democratic Party, particularly starting with the Clinton administration, although Jimmy Carter was part of this, sold out the working class, sold out working men and women. And that's just a reality that they won't acknowledge, nor, of course, their own complicity in doing it. So I don't see in all of the postmortems any grappling with why the Democratic Party, because it's not, and Bernie Sanders did make this point, that it's not just the white working class that's now walked out on the Democrats, it's the Latino working class and large sections of the Black working class because of their betrayal by the Democrats. So I think that what we've seen following the election, remember, they're trying to resurrect Kamala Harris now to run for governor. They're talking about her, that they need to have her run in the next presidential race. This is, and the whole convention itself, the Democratic National Convention, which nominated a woman who never won a primary vote. There was no dissent. The campaign itself was celebrity driven, Beyonce, Oprah, all this kind of stuff. Absolutely vapid, absolutely hollow. No, I think it's the death of the Democratic Party. I don't know what comes in its place, if anything. Trump has reconfigured the Republican Party, the establishment wing of the Republican Party, including Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney, her father, who left as a war criminal and left office with a 13% approval rating. The Democrats, or in particular Harris, were running around lauding the fact that they endorsed them. So the establishment wing of the Republican Party has migrated to the Democratic Party, fused with the Democratic Party, figures like Mitt Romney, and Trump has created a very cultish political organization. But I don't see any signs within the Democratic Party that it has the capacity for self-analysis, self-criticism, and real reform. And that's, of course, very dangerous.
And finally, it's very strange. I myself, in my monologue, attacked Jimmy Carter almost in exactly the same words that you have just criticized him. There is a tradition not to speak ill of the recently dead, but one cannot look at the whole post-Afghan intervention by Carter and Brzezinski, the theorist of it, Carter, the political driver of it. If you think about it, that's 45 years ago. Those acts have, to a significant extent, shaped the events of the last 45 years. He wasn't any saint, Jimmy Carter, but he did do one thing that might help him at the pearly gates. He identified the apartheid nature of the Israeli state, something which has not been mentioned, I should tell you, in any of the Western panegyrics to which we've been treated on this side of the Atlantic. It's as if he never wrote that book after all.
Yes, of course he did that out of office, but in office, he orchestrated the Camp David Accords in 1979 between Sadat, president of Egypt, and Menachem Begin, where he sold out the Palestinians. He refused to allow the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, to even partake in the talks. All of the promises that Begin made to Carter to attempt to resolve the Palestinian question along with Jordan and Egypt, to permit Palestinian self-governance in the West Bank and Gaza within 5 years, to end Israeli settlements. None of it, as usual, none of it came to pass. Carter, in fact, accused Begin of lying. But the fact is there was no mechanism for enforcement at all for all of these promises, many of which were not even written down on paper. And Carter, like all U.S. presidents, was unwilling to defy the Israel lobby to impose sanctions. And the Palestinians, once again found themselves powerless and abandoned. And that was Carter. So we have to separate ex-President Carter from President Carter. I mean, I was covering the war in El Salvador at the time, and Archbishop Oscar Romero, later assassinated, begged Carter to cease weapon shipments to El Salvador, and Carter refused. I mean, he backed Mobutu in the Congo. He gave significant military aid to the Indonesian government when it was carrying out the genocide in East Timor. He actually walked away from the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks Treaty, SALT II, with the Soviet Union, which sought to curb nuclear weapons deployment. He had a pretty nasty, he supported UNITA, the murderous counter-revolutionary group led by Jonas Savimbi, along with the Khmer Rouge. So, and Ferdinand Marcos. And of course, you mentioned the Mujahideen, which he in essence created along with the Saudis, the Taliban in the war in Afghanistan, which left 1.5 million Afghans dead. So is a pretty dark record as president.
Trying to convey his point of view. Mr. Lavrov stated, Mr. Medvedev, Ukraine as it exists now is not going to exist anymore. It's just a matter of how it will be cut out, which is happening anyway. And then, of course, whatever they mean binding agreements of no NATO or neutral status, and what will be the role of Russia? Obviously, Russia will have the control of the whole of the eastern, of the left bank of Dnieper. And then, of course, depends on how the, in the end, the Ukraine as a whole will be, how to put it, it's not, well, kind of on the way to confederation. Ukraine essentially have to become confederation at some point of time, totally neutral, based on the Istanbul agreements, with this time even smaller military. And of course, regime has to go. We understand that. And then the program of denazification should start already in earnest in the political and social institutions there in Ukraine. So that's the minimum. And of course, the moment Kellogg utters this word, freezing, that will be over and say, yeah, here's the door, bye-bye, so we're not talking. And that's what it is. And they have to really throw this stupid idea of freezing somehow the conflict and postponing NATO membership for 20 years. Nobody's going to be talking to them in Moscow. Doesn't matter who Trump think he is. So Russia has escalation dominance, and she's doing what she's doing. And she can continue to do it for a long, long time, so, and that will be the minimum, so to speak. After that, that's the matter of the details, and those could be, yes, they say the devil is in the details, and how much confederalization, if you wish, which I think so is going to be on the table of Ukraine, obviously with the target, and the bargain will be this way. Russians save face for Trump administration. They played along with Trump administration, making it the Biden's war. And after that, but essentially Trump has to agree to the fact that the confederation status will imply in the future, for example, the peaceful voting or plebiscite, if you wish, or the referendum in such places like Odessa Oblast and other oblasts of Ukraine, which are not touched yet by Russian army, of basically going first initially independent, and then of course doing what everybody expects them to do, to join the Russian Federation as the new, territories of Russia. That I should think will be the key point here. And the Russians will say, yeah, sure, we'll play along. We'll say, hey, we will even give you a little bit of credit, so in terms of here's your, and Trump loves credit, make no mistake. I mean, come on, everybody knows Trump loves self-aggrandizing. And Russians will say, yeah, sure. We'll say, you see, Mr. Trump came and suddenly you found the common language and all that thing, and say, yeah, this bad Biden and his, war criminals, Sullivan and Blinken and things like that. And then suddenly, oh my God, Trump comes out and my God, adoration, applause, things like that. He will take credit for everything, of course, inevitably. But at least in this case, that will be a good deal.
And Scott, let me throw that at you. And I think Andre covered it also, but if you could add what you think about, the neocons in Europe don't want that. The people of Europe do, but okay, I think it's pretty straightforward of what the Russians want. They're pretty clear about what they want. Whether they want the retreating all the way back to the 91 borders or whatever, all that kind of stuff. Okay, but your thoughts on what it would take, as Andre was talking about, and maybe whatever you'll add, to at least get the Russians' attention to say, you know what, I think you're serious, we can talk. And the European neocons pushback. Will they really push back against the leader of the U.S.? I've said all along, I think they fold the day Biden walks out, that they're spineless jellyfish. And the day Biden walks out, that they all walk up to Trump and say, we've always supported you. And that Joe Biden, so glad to see him gone. But maybe I'm wrong. Scott Ritter.
Okay, so I have to put on my American advisor hat here.
Okay.
This is I'm now promoting the American point of view. The first thing is, I would tell the president, we need to end the state of war between the United States and Russia. And whether we have officially declared war or not, as long as we have a policy that seeks the strategic defeat of Russia, we are at war with Russia. So right off the bat, you need to terminate the state of war before anything. You're not even going to get a seat at the table without that. Two, Mr. President, Russia has won this war, and we must act accordingly to that. The earlier we recognize the Russian victory, the better deal we're going to get. Now, we do want a deal here. I would start off by going to, foundational things. Russia put a draft treaty on the table back in December 17, 2021, that sought the rollback of NATO to 1997 lines. Mr. President, we're not going to do that. NATO is where NATO is going to be. And we're going to get the Russians to agree to that in treaty. And what we're going to do is have a speedy resolution of this conflict in exchange for Russia recognizing that NATO is where NATO's at. That's the biggest damn victory you're going to get, Mr. President, because NATO's defeated right now. All right. And if we continue to drag things out and Russia makes us a sticking point, I don't know how much longer Europe can hold up. European Union's cracking, NATO's cracking. We don't need to do that to our allies and our friends. What we need to do is get Russia to agree that NATO is where NATO is. And that's going to be solidified in a treaty that brings it into this conflict. Two, Mr. President, we need to retain as much Ukrainian territory as possible for Ukraine. And the way we do that is we give Russia all 4 territories that they have annexed. We give it to them in totality. Straight up agree to it, recognize it as part of Russia. We do not turn this into a Baltic situation where we print maps for the next 50 years that show the Baltics aren't part of the Soviet Union. We agree to this, but in exchange for that, there will be no referendum in Odessa, Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk. It's over. Once the line is drawn, it's finished. All right. There is no future Russian referendum to take over Odessa or anything like that. We harden that line. 2, in exchange for there never being NATO in Ukraine, which we have to concede, it's a core Russian thing. There will be no discussions without that. We need to keep the door open for Ukraine to become a member of the European Union. All right. So we have to be careful about the political future of Ukraine. recognize that the Banderas are finished. I think we need to go with Russia early on this one and have constitutional amendments that end the Banderist ideology. But we have to make sure that Ukraine, after a certain period of time, has the ability to have internationally monitored, fair and free elections to determine its government, its own government. And then we begin the long game of bringing Ukraine over to the European Union. Mr. President, we don't want Ukraine to become a union with Russia similar to Belarus. That would be bad for us in terms of balance of power in Europe. We need to have, right now, we need to start with Ukraine being neutral, and we need to respect that. But we need to keep the door open for the political and economic influence that comes with European Union membership. And so as part of our negotiation, we concede up front to the Russians. We yield without fighting, but in exchange, we freeze NATO where it's at, and we ensure that Ukraine retains as much territorial integrity as possible, and we keep the door open for European Union membership down the road. Mr. President, understand this. If we talked about, in 30 years ago, talked about the Soviet Union and NATO and all that, it's a completely different conversation than we're having today. Mr. President, Vladimir Putin is 70 some odd years old. He's not going to be president forever. Russia doesn't have a succession plan for Vladimir Putin. So what we need to do is make sure that we have our act as together as we can have it on the day that Vladimir Putin is no longer president, so that we are prepared to take advantage of any opportunity that presents itself in the political chaos that's going to ensue in Russia if they don't get a succession plan. Russia has a problem. The problem is Vladimir Putin, not in the way that we have said it. Vladimir Putin has been a tremendous president for Russia, too good, because there is nobody to take his place. And so, Mr. President, let's give the Russians as much as they need right now to get this war over, to get ourselves in a favorable position. We should have the best relations with Russia as possible, because there's a chance that the Russian government is going to collapse when Vladimir Putin goes away. And we need to be in a position to take advantage of that, Mr. President. That would be my advice. Now I take my hat off and recognize I just probably pissed off everybody, but that's what I would advise the president if I were coming at it from an American standpoint.
No, you didn't piss off anybody. That would have been a sensible thing from the purely American point of view. What I disagree, however, strongly, we have the guy right now who is waiting in the wings, and he is no less than deputy of Vladimir Putin himself. His name, he used to be the president himself, Dmitry Anatolyevich Medvedev, who commands enormous respect among not only Russian populace, but also among armed forces and, most importantly, intelligence services. So that's the thing which you have to keep in mind. And one of the ways for him to earn what was already there, I mean, when you begin to look at it attentively, actually, it was Mr. Putin who was against Russia's reaction to 2008, Georgian, how to say, escapades. It was actually Dmitry Medvedev who gave the order. Putin was trying to play diplomacy with none other than Mr. Bush at the opening of the Olympic Games in Beijing. And that's what many people say, oh, yeah, it was Putin who... No. Putin actually was asking Medvedev, being prime minister then, that, just hold on, let's talk, let's kind of, and Medvedev said, no, 58th Army, just go, and off they went. And in this case, we cannot discount that. It's obvious that very many in Russia, definitely among service people, they view Medvedev as a totally legitimate figure. And fact is, yeah, he's very aggressive. I mean, my gosh, there are some people who would love to see him instead of Putin, because yeah, he openly professes his hatred towards combined West, so my God. So in this case, yeah, but other than what you said, Scott, in terms of, yeah, that's probably going to be the American starting point, I think. So I think so it's reasonable to assume that's what would be told to Trump. Trump is, we even want to move somewhere with this. After that, of course, there will be the negotiation and the continuation of the whatever, you know what, yeah. I looked up today, statistics is horrifying, so it's just My God.
Scott, let me show something to you. Here's an article in The Hill. Hold Ukraine accountable for corruption.
Oh yeah.
And they go after Zelensky like I don't know what. They go. I mean, there's a lot of truth in here. There's a few things that I question, but I'll put it like this: over the last couple years, you would not see this kind of stuff. It seems to me they're looking to scapegoat old Zelensky. And while I'm no defender of Zelensky, I'll say this. I mean, if we're honest about it, he was a puppet and they set him up for failure. He had a deal to get away in Istanbul, which was a smart move, and they snatched the rug out from under him. I mean, not to defend Zelensky, but the truth is what it is. He was going to walk away a month afterwards and get a deal, and they came and told him you can't do it. So to some extent, I guess I am defending Zelensky because the neocons are using anybody. They're setting this guy up for the scapegoat, and he'll be lucky to live long. Either they yank the MI6 guards and the Azov battalion does God only knows what, or the CIA. Anyway, your thoughts on? I put it like this: I don't think anybody in the U.S. is going to say, "Oops, I screwed up." They got to point to somebody, and it looks like it's going to be old Zelensky. Anyway, your thoughts on all of this, Scott?
Well, I don't think there's going to be an investigation into Ukraine once this is over, because once you start poking, it comes right back home. And nobody wants to talk about how we knew from day one the corruption, how this was factored in. They're going to try and keep all the reporting coming from the CIA and from the State Department about corruption secret. They don't want to probe. Just like in Afghanistan, have we really dug into what we did in Afghanistan for 20 years in terms of buying people off and I mean, we heard about the duffel bag full of money falling out of the president's helicopter, but that's sort of all we heard about. We sort of chuckled about it. Oh, isn't that quaint? $100 million flying through the air. Ha ha ha. Why? Why are we at this late stage, 20 years in? Why are we delivering duffel bags of cash to warlords in Afghanistan? Because the entire thing is corrupt. We don't want to dig into the whole drug thing, what was going on with the drugs and the opium production and the money that was being passed off and all this kind of stuff. We don't want to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about Ukraine. And so I think what we're going to do is it's the same thing with South Vietnam. When the South Vietnamese government fell, did anybody say, well, we need to investigate them now? We need to investigate the South Vietnamese government to find out what the hell went wrong there. No, because we knew what went wrong. We knew how corrupt it was because we were the corruptors. The CIA was the corrupting party. The CIA isn't going to allow any investigation into that. The Phoenix program.
Read that. If anybody wants to know what the hell happened in Vietnam. Okay.
So my point is I don't think there's going to be any. We are going to, the Ukrainian government will collapse. It will go into exile. They will fall in on their hundreds of millions of dollars that they've stolen away, and no one will talk about it. Over the course of the next 10, 20 years, some intrepid journalists will start pulling at threads, and documents will be exposed through Freedom of Information Act. Guys that are in their 40s today, when they're in their 80s, 40 years from now, will suddenly have a pang of consciousness and start talking to people, writing memoirs, and we'll get a good picture of it then. But in terms of all this is going to, as soon as this war is over, watch how quick America wants to forget about it, how quick we want to move on to the next thing.
Except one thing. The United States have never been at war with Russia. And it was the winning party, victory party to Nuremberg trials. Russia has already operating international tribunal for the war crimes in Ukraine. And it is one thing to, cover things from South Vietnam or from Iraq or Afghanistan. Russians do have a very good intelligence and recon, and they have the number of the ground assets in human CIA can only dream about in Ukraine, And so Russia has ways of informing the rest of the world about what was happening, how it was happening. The names of people from CIA operatives, from MI6, from Pentagon, who have been directly involved in all kinds of the situations that are known. Just yesterday, they showed some Polish guy mercenary they took the prisoner of war. He's just one of many. We don't know how many Americans are already in there, and what is the bargaining, behind the scene. But Russians know and CIA know. So, and the tribunal has been already established. And once the hostilities, the active combat is kind of over and things begin to settle, there will be very similar to international tribunal, in Nuremberg, and about war crimes, because there is a lot of war crimes have been committed there. And I mean, it might fly with Vietnam or with Afghanistan. It cannot fly with nuclear superpower, And this is, as I already stated, it's all about this triangle, what is called Premier League in geopolitics: United States, Russia, and China. How this triangle goes. But now looks like China also is interested in hearing things, what happened. Well, India obviously will be interested. So the rest of the what is called global south will be very interested in listening to what have been committed there in Ukraine. And as I already stated, even by the utterly conservative, almost, thrift, almost, the all kinds of the, Scroogey things, by Russian Defense Ministry, where something like, I believe, 30,000 away from 1 million official casualties by Russian Defense Ministry, which is, of course, you can easily multiply it by 2, and that's where you get. So we look now at what happens, which is actual death of the nation. For example, when there was a 1999 NATO gang rape of Yugoslavia, there was a book which came out with the title "The Death of a Nation." Well, it was sort of the death, obviously, but it was in political and kind of social terms. Serbs haven't been exterminated as a nation. Serbs continue to live. They go out, get acquainted with girls, boys, they raise families, give birth to children. They are, in many respects, European nation, which, of course, with its own twist. In Ukraine, we have the actual physical extermination of the nation. Many people forget this. We do not know actual number of the direct and indirect casualties of Ukraine, of this, what was happening. Actually, many people still do not understand. It all started in 2014. It was just, kind of gestating until it exploded. And I predicted already, and that at some point of time it's gonna blow. And we're looking now at tens of millions. This is just, think about it. Ukraine started this whole thing being the country of roughly 40+ million population. By different estimates today, it has less than 18 million. What is known in terms of the statistics of the 18 to 25 demographics, 18 year to 25, it has roughly 300,000 of them. And out of them, roughly 160,000 of them are being pushed to be mobilized by Blinken and Sullivan. And that means once they go, their children, okay? Once they go against those, those Doberman pinchers and, all kinds of the pit bulls, of Russian army, how long they gonna last, those 160,000? I can tell you, about 3 months. And after that, Ukraine ceases to exist as the ethnic state, because actually they will have no sperm to breed themselves, period. Simple as that. Because basically the generation of these men who are after between 25 and, well, even 60, but primarily 25, 45, it's gone. It's either killed, maimed, or ran away and spread itself around the world. Here in Washington, you will see a bunch of cars suddenly driving with all those, Ukrainian flags. We went to eat the, hot dogs, famous hot dogs into the Leavenworth. There is a village there, which is the Norwegian and German village in the state of Washington. Leavenworth, that's very famous. It's old, this alpine village. You buy there all kinds of, Wiener schnitzels and things like that. We go in last summer. It's just Ukrainian speech or Russian speech by Ukrainian everywhere, literally. You go into any restaurant or you just you look at this like, what the hell, man? So this is how they have been spread around the world, including the United States. And it's just only the part of the problem, what many people have to remember.
Scott,
let me just add just one quick caveat, though. Andre, I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, except to point out the following. The Russians haven't publicized the Americans they've captured, or they're holding on to it and they're keeping it quiet. And I believe because that's Moscow rules. That's the rules that I lived under. And in the 1980s, we didn't spill the secrets about the other side. We spied on them. We uncovered things, but we kept it. We kept things quiet because it was the day of music. So I'm wondering if Trump is serious about turning the page and not becoming best buddy with Russia, but stop being in a state of war and the potential of the lifting of sanctions, etc. If I would just tell, if I were advising against Trump, I would say you need to get your best Russia hand in the CIA, somebody that the Russians know, and he needs to get in there quick, and we need to nip this thing in the bud. We need to get the Americans out of there quietly. There can be no trials. The Americans will be returned quietly. And if the Russians want to write about it down the road, let's put a 5-year moratorium on it right now. But let's depoliticize this thing and because both sides I believe, are interested in a clean end to this conflict. They don't want a dirty end to this conflict. I agree. There's going to be a tribunal. There's going to be Azov's going to be held accountable and all this kind of stuff. But for the United States, there's no reason for Russia, especially if we want sanctions lifted, to
if they're lifted. I don't think so, though. Trump will do it, but yeah, I agree with you in general. Yeah, I totally agree with you, Vector. But will it happen? We'll see. Obviously,
I'm going to throw something at you guys, and that are my thoughts. I don't think the issue is the U.S. or Russia, either one. Ukraine is a very, very corrupt country, and when the Russians come in, and it's clear that the Russians are in power and they have they're on the Russian border, there were going to be a whole lot of Ukrainians who are going to call the Russians and say, hey, you know what? I might have done some things that I shouldn't have done. And you might have I'll tell you what I do. I got some info for you. If you could maybe pay me or let me walk, maybe you could, the Russians pick somebody up. Hey, we got you for this, can we deal? Really? Well, I can tell you this, I can give you documents on this, blah. So I think there are going to be a lot of Ukrainians who are holding on to dirt, to recordings, to documents, to everything they can. And when they get a chance to bargain for themselves, they'll say to the Russians, I'll sell you, or if you got me with something, you let me walk, I give you this. So I think the issue that the Americans are going to have, the Ukrainians, are going to hate the US and NATO. They're going to be angrier at us than they are, and they're going to say, "This
that's
is
the point which
in America."
Go ahead.
That's the point which many people are. Ukrainians are by no means cowards. Obviously, there is a lot of national characters in them, which is not necessarily commendable. But we all have our faults. But yeah, the way this nation was duped into the suicide, and in trying to be the basically slave owners, But the point is, right now, there is not a single Ukrainian family which doesn't have somebody who hasn't been killed or maimed to the point of complete disfigurement on the special military operation. And when they obviously, make no mistake, even today, their territories like Donetsk and Lugansk, they're still corrupt. It takes enormous, effort to deal with what the legacy of the Ukrainian corruption, which has been there, But the point is, did anybody ask oneself a question? How many there will be people who would love to settle scores? Or there will be many. And those people will not be your those people will be people who know how to handle real arms. They will know how to handle explosives. They will have basic, skills in the operative work, on the surveillance, on the recon, on the all kinds of things. They will have their very good relations with the, for example, European organized crime, which already benefits from their, So, and when you look at this, what those people think that they can kill basically 1.5 million people and maim another 1.5 million, and this all kind of the topsy-turvy. And I don't know. There could be some those what is called black swans, those factors which are beyond the control even Russians. Albeit, Garland, I have to admit, yes, you are absolutely correct. There will be many people who will be buying their safety.
I talked about that in my speech to the UN Security Council. I warned them. That's exactly what I said. Okay, Scott, let's get back to you.
Let me just, can I throw in one thing? United States likes to claim that we're the nation of the rule of law and that we do things by the book and all that. I will tell you right now, any Ukrainian that attempts to blackmail the United States of America will not be alive very long.
No, it's not about the United States of America. It's personal. You don't have to. You will find people who they will blackmail. And I'm telling you, it's not that they go to some. No, I'm talking about they will know names, they will know addresses.
But Andre, there were Vietnamese that knew all this about the CIA, the State Department.
No, it's very different. It's very different. For starters,
people stop breathing for the same reasons, Andre, and the Ukrainians will stop breathing if they try and blackmail the wrong Americans. That's a guarantee. We have an entire group of people who are very good at making things stop breathing. And
they may be
reality.
I suspect there'll be a lot of people trying to get out of trouble with the Russians in Ukraine, or trying to say, there's a new sheriff in town. They'll be trying to sell information to the Russians. And
I think the Russians have a bigger problem than we do, and I'll tell you why. I'll give you an example. Novosibirsk. Novosibirsk is a hotbed of anti-Putin political activity. Navalny's people were running around doing things even after Navalny started being targeted. The Communist Party was very powerful in Novosibirsk. Shimkiv, the head of the Legislative Assembly, sought to blackmail Putin in this next election, bragging about how he had 22 seats in the Duma, and so don't fuck with me, don't mess with me, Mr. Putin, kind of thing. These are guys that are running around. They aren't in support of the SMO. They're currently arresting civilian groups that organize money to send equipment to the SMO because they are in cahoots with Ukrainian intelligence. I think Ukrainian intelligence has connectivity throughout all of Russia. And that's where Russians have a problem, because now the Ukrainians will say, hey, we're going to turn you into the to Moscow FSB. And I think Russia has a big problem, because there's a big underground of political.
There is an underground, no doubt about it. I mean, yes, there is.
It's been flying under the radar, and there's already work. I mean, look, this is personal. My friend's arrested. My friend is arrested. Alexander,
I know.
Arrested by the most corrupt son of a bitches in Novosibirsk. People who are known to be corrupt. People who are known to be Ukrainian supervisors.
Chief of Police of Novosibirsk and Procurator General of Novosibirsk are Azeris. This is the ethnic or organized crime group, and from what I heard, it's been developed, quote unquote, by appropriate services. So, but Russia is trying to be the land of the law. But the point is, there is not a ninja in the world which can do anything when it's shot in the back. Simple as that.
Now let's move back to the issue of a deal. The Europeans. You know, here's what I think. In the long run, the Americans, they can, if they get a deal with the Russians, you know how they can walk away from stuff and move on. The Europeans are in a world of deep and serious hurt. And might I add, it looks like Germany's going to have a election in February. And Trump coming in, what happens with Trump between when he comes in and that month, which is the 20th, that period of time, I think has a dramatic effect on Germany's elections and on politics in Europe. Your thoughts, Scott, you lived in Europe. Your thoughts on the politics, because that's a mess here. Well, let me add one thing. Scott Ritter said at the beginning with Dr. Wilmer and I on our show, Scott Ritter said, these politicians, none of them are going to survive. At the very beginning, he said they're all going to fall, and they're falling. They're holding on for what best they can. Your thoughts on the political ramifications in Europe of this? Because the U.S. can make it. We can raise our own food. We have a military of some type, and we have energy. The United States as a country can survive if you got those three things. Europe doesn't have maybe one out of three. Anyway, your thoughts. Political ramifications, Scott, of this mess starting on January 20th. How did they deal with it? Because are they really going to fight with Trump? I do not see European leaders ever saying, I'm going to fight with the president of the U.S. because they know how bad they'll lose and how quickly. Scott Ritter.
Well, first of all, we have to look out for the definition of European. When I lived in Europe, there was no European Union. So Europe was actually divided to east and west. And we dealt with individual sovereign states, each with their own bank, currency. I mean, it was pretty cool to travel around Europe because you cross over the border and the first thing you do is you go exchange your Deutschmarks for the French francs. And then when you cross over, you exchange for Spanish pesos. It's pretty cool because I've got downstairs a couple coffee cans full of coins from Europe when Europe was really Europe, not this fake entity called the European Union, which is half the problem. Because today, what is Europe? And this European Union experiment is collapsing. It's failing, and the linchpin will be Germany, I believe. I think AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, has a really good shot at winning this election, but it could also trigger a huge constitutional crisis, because one of the last things the Schultz government has done is empower the Constitutional Court to be independent and immune and above anything. And so the Constitutional Court could very well find that AfD is an extremist organization and therefore nullify the election, which creates interesting ramifications going forward. Let's just look at Romania, where that exactly happened, where in the first round of elections, the right-wing candidate whose name begins with a G that I can't pronounce.
Georgescu.
Thank you. I'm glad there's one educated person on this panel.
No, I just know Romanian names.
I'm just American. I'm just like, yes, Mr. G.
I always think of Ceausescu. I know it's close to that.
Very similar. Yeah.
Ceausescu with a G. But he not only won the first round and got into the second round, he was going to dominate the second round and become the president of Romania. And he said straight up, I'm not playing this Ukraine game anymore. And I'm really thinking about this NATO game. And I'm really thinking about all these games we're playing. They're bad. And so the court took fake intelligence from the intelligence services, intervened, nullified the election. And even after they come out and said, yeah, none of that was true. Everything we said the Russians were doing, none of it's true. We all acknowledge none of it's true. They're still not taking action. This is, the rear guard action, but Romania will not emerge stronger from this. Romania's in a crisis right now, and this crisis is going to resonate throughout Europe. And if Germany tries to play that game, you're going to see even a more rapid decline of Germany. Their economy's already, below the waterline. France, Macron is just playing stupid games right now in the parliament, refusing to acknowledge the majority victory and continue to try and create these minority governments. They're collapsing. Macron's not long for this world too. I don't mean dying, I mean politically. And one by one, their Starmer is out. I mean, he's finished. The Brits are and what's that? Now fifth or sixth prime minister going to have in as many years. That's not a sign of political stability. Ironically, Giorgia Meloni is appearing as one of the most stable political figures in what we call Europe today. And to say that an Italian prime minister is the epitome of stability is crazy. But that's where we're at. Europe, they're not going to fight Trump. They can't fight Trump.
That's more they're proper. Yeah, they can't.
They can't fight Trump.
Yeah.
Trump. I mean, look, I'm not proud of this. I'm not sitting here saying this. I know if I looked at the comments, people go, Scott Ritter's an American. He's a Marine, a capitalist. He's a pig. He's this. Whatever. I don't care. You can say that about me because I don't care, and that's the American in me. I don't care. But what the point is, I don't like the arrogance of the United States. I'm not defending the arrogance. I'm just stating straight up, we're arrogant. We are arrogant as hell, and the most arrogant one is Donald Trump. And if you think for a second, one iota, that he's going to put up with any crap from anybody in Europe, when they know he can unplug them at any time, Donald Trump will have the ability to be the kingmaker in Europe, because Donald Trump will have the ability to make things happen or make things not happen, especially when it comes to NATO and the European Union. And so I think if you look at some of the tweets that are coming out of Trump land, I think they've already sent the signal. AfD is going to be the next government of Germany. You see,
Starmer's out. Starmer's out. Starmer's out. Elon Musk is arguing with Starmer.
Yeah, Starmer's out. But Germany, because remember, Brexit, UK is not part of Europe anymore. They're sort of their own thing. But Germany is part of Europe. And the easiest way for Trump to get Europe to go in the direction he wants it to go, which frankly speaking is the end of NATO, either the diminishment or the elimination of the European Union, and turning Europe into this continent of independent sovereign states that we can rule by dividing and conquering, because that's what we do best. We don't want to deal with this thing called the European Union. We want to deal with Germany. We want to deal with Poland, because then we can play stupid games like, hey, Poland, if Germany does this, we're going to do this to you. We play them off against one another. That's what Trump likes to do. And so he's already putting the marker down that AfD is it. And he's going to, if the Constitutional Court wants to play different, watch how quick the Germans do away with that Constitutional Court. If Donald Trump starts coming and going, unplug, because he doesn't care. That's the other thing. He's not Joe Biden that sits there and cries crocodile tears over the long and wonderful relationship we have with Europe and NATO. It's sacred, our sacred duty. Not to Trump. Trump's looking at say, this is a bad business deal. And what do business leaders do when you have a bad business deal? You try to unpackage it and get rid of it. And I think that's what's going to happen here. I think you're going to see the Trump administration take a look at the people he's appointed as ambassadors. These aren't people who are friends to these nations. These are predators coming in, and they're there to play silly reindeer games. So that's what I think we're looking at for the next 4 years at least. And if J.D. Vance can continue on, we're talking about a complete restructuring of Europe. Macron missed his chance. He kept talking about the need to restructure Europe, to divorce himself from America. Too late, Emmanuel Macron. Donald Trump will go, guy, and you guys can play the handshake game and all that kind of stuff. Nobody cares. America doesn't care. France, Germany, it doesn't matter. We will manipulate them like they've never been manipulated, because they're so weak. They literally don't bring anything to the table. This is the problem. This is why Russia has such a great negotiating position, because Russia brings everything to the table. We're the ones that come to the Russian table with not too much. But when it comes to Europe, we're 100% in control of this game. And the game will go anyway. But politically speaking, because Trump understands that Europe's best strength isn't in Europe, but in the United States. The Congress of the United States is still populated by people that believe in NATO, believe in this. So what you want to do is create the situation where what you want to happen to Europe is being done by Europeans to Europeans, not by Americans to Europeans. And that's why AFD is one of the great hopes for Trump, because AFD says we're out of the European Union. AFD says we're not playing the NATO game. And this is music to Trump's ears.
You know, also about Trump, you know, when you hear the things that would be necessary to get a deal, the first inclination is, oh, Congress will never go with, oh, the neocons will never go with that. But people who are in the U.S. understand and pay attention to politics, and I pay close attention to politics, Trump's one of the most powerful presidents of our lifetime for this reason. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying he's a genius or anything, but this is reality. He smashed the media to pieces. He smashed them. He crushed them. They came after him with everything they could, and he just wiped them and left them on the floor. The Democratic Party, as I've always said, they're like a boxer. You ever see when they hit a boxer and he's disoriented and he's laying and he's reaching for his mouthpiece? He's looking. They're looking around for their mouthpiece. The Republican Party, that's not a Republican Party anymore. Trump wiped all of the whatever they call them, the regular Republicans that don't like Trump. They are, if Trump goes to any of their districts and says, I don't like this guy, I want him to lose in the midterms, he's gone. If Trump says, this is my guy, run him against Scott Ritter in District 12, Scott Ritter's done. So he's won. And might I add, the Democrats are looking at him saying, well, what do we do? We tried to call him a racist, but he took the black vote. He took the Latino vote. Everybody went for Trump. The Democrat, nobody knows how to even respond. So certainly a president could not do the things necessary to get a deal. But Trump can, because he walked through the system like a hot knife through butter.
Yeah.
Andre.
Plus, United States, again, Europe is not a subject, it's an object. And in 21st century, industrially and energy-wise, I mean, listen, I am a little bit, you may not, well, you don't know this, but I do have my Telegram channel. And you know what, once in a while, I have this, discussion from Russian part, that, oh my God, you know what, we have the, Germans left us, the automotive industry, and said, good Lord, count your blessings. And when I tell them, you know what, and luckily for me, there are many auto mechanics and even people who own dealership, they say, American engines is like way better than German engines. This is what many people do not understand. American cars may suffer in some, other things, but when you look at what Germans did in terms of anything they do, it is absolutely over-engineered, over-expensive, overpriced, overrated, and suddenly they, and you look at this, and then suddenly Russia gets this culture of pickup trucks. So who would have thought? You have the Chinese automotive companies coming out, Russia's taking the American way in this respect, and then suddenly all those, wow, and they try to get those Rams and F-150s too, by all kinds of other ways, and just like, no, that's a big change. Before that, you buy some kind of Audi, it's status symbol and things like now people, it doesn't work like this anymore. But you have to keep in mind also, which is, of course, never in my life, never in my 62 years of life, and I'm a Cold Warrior 1.0, did I see such contempt and rejection on part of Russian society as a whole of the combined, primarily Europe. With the United States, it's more nuanced. It's like, yeah, we need to kick their ass, but you know what? We need to talk. There is this understanding, But in terms of Europe, I mean, my God, it's unbelievable. They talk about Europeans as the basically, second-rate people, and while the Europe as their political and economic entity is becoming second-rate. That's if you look at actually what was done to German economy. This is never in my life could I see the nation commit suicide, industrial economic suicide, as Germans did. My criteria is very simple. I repeat it for 10 years. Nation which has the Green Party as a viable political force, it needs to its head examined. because this is just absolutely no, it's mental problem. So
I agree with you, Scott. Now, Andre. Now, let me ask you this, Scott. Militarily speaking, now we're still hearing a little bit of, just a little bit of, oh, we're going to send troops, or we're thinking about troops. Europe can't even be an ally to anyone. I mean, it seems to me there's nothing left militarily, nothing left physically. They sent everything into the trash compactor, and Russia smashed it to bits for them. And they don't have the, even if Trump says, look, hey, 5% of your GDP. Well, from the looks of things, 5% of their GDP ain't going to be much, because their GDP, when you're deindustrialized, your GDP is next to nothing. After this ends, or whatever happens, militarily speaking, economically speaking, and particularly militarily speaking, where does Europe stand? I don't see how militarily, they don't even have the money to rebuild a military. And let's face it, most of them didn't have much in the first place. Scott.
Let's start with Germany again, because I think Germany is the linchpin that holds this whole farce together. Was it in 2022, the fall, that Scholz said, we're going to commit $100 billion to rebuild the German military in recognition of our need to confront the Russians. And so that's 100 billion euros. That's a lot of money in a short period of time. And they got the money allocated, and they did it. Last year, in their defense budget, Pistorius said that he needed to have the defense budget increased by a certain percentage. I can't remember what the percentage was, but it wasn't a huge number, but it was a number. He said that, because here's the thing, we already ate through the 100 billion and nothing's been accomplished. It's gone. The money's gone, and the German Air Force is still grounded. Look at the German Air Force. Most of their aircraft are hangar queens because they haven't been maintained. There is no German Air Force.
yeah,
There's a handful of aircraft, but there's not an Air Force. Look at the German army. To get the battalion deployed to Lithuania, they had to go around and literally cannibalize all of the other armored battalions. So much so that when they held a major exercise to get the units out of the barracks, they didn't have enough machine guns. They had to take broomsticks and paint them black and mount them, because they hadn't thought this one through. And yet they've stripped everything, to send to Ukraine. And in doing so, the sanctions, the gas is too expensive to run the furnaces that do the smelters that create the metal that's used to build tanks and all this kind of stuff. Germany, basically, Pistorius said, hey, we got this brigade we want to put into Lithuania. We want to increase that battalion to a brigade. And we need money to do that. Plus, we need to continue to build our military. And we're not talking about the major buildup that, these weird admirals who, Bauer and all this company are talking about. We're just talking about sustainment kind of stuff, so that Germany can get more than a brigade out of the barracks at one time. The parliament sent him a budget that was significantly, it was lower than the rate of inflation. That means that from a real standpoint, the German military has to shrink. So at a time when they were talking about expanding the German military, because their parliament gave them a budget that was less than inflation, Germany can't afford the military it has, so it has to shrink. This is the reality. Germany will never, ever, ever, ever build this military that all the warmongers in NATO and the European Union are talking about, because Germany can't afford it. Their economy is trash. They don't have the income, the ability to generate the income. They have priorities called national survival. And I'm talking about economic and social survival, not some fake war with Russia that's never going to happen. That's Germany, and that's the centerpiece of NATO right there. France isn't any better. France, again, is passing budgets that they can't afford, that are accomplishing nothing. One of the problems with Europe, especially Western Europe, is that, back in the 60s and 70s, NATO went through this big move to make sure that all the European armies were interchangeable with the Americans, so that you could do it. Because, and now we get into what real war fighting is like. You know, if we were going to fight the Soviets, we were going to send in, you know, we had our corps already there, but we're going to send in divisions, part of the reinforcement of Germany, Reforger exercises. When we were going to fight, we were going to take casualties like you wouldn't believe. I mean, it was just planned. We're going to go in there and basically you're going to tell this battalion, your job is to die right here so we can get this other battalion up over here. And we're going to watch, you know, battalions disappear, entire battalions, watch brigades get whittled down to battalion size. And then what would have to happen is this happened to a bunch of units. They would then consolidate them. This was the plan, consolidate them into a new entity with a new command element and send them back into the fight. But this means that you might be sending a division that has German, has some British, has some American units brought together because of the compatibility things. So we could logistically sustain them. We operated off the same playbook and all this kind of stuff. Okay, so now we carry over into the Cold War, but that goes away. We stop doing large scale warfare and we start breaking down into, you know, smaller nation. You know, the United States goes off and does its thing around the world, and then we bring NATO in, but we say, you know, Germany's going to run the German thing, the French are going to run the French thing in Afghanistan and all this. They still have to go through the expense of being an interchangeable force, but they aren't. And what I'm trying to get at is their militaries are too expensive. The cost for a soldier, a NATO soldier, is prohibitively high, and they're not worth the price you're paying because they're not that good. Back in the old days, you pay a premium price for a soldier that was truly interchangeable, part of this big force that knew how to fight. Today, the NATO army is a joke. They go through a lot of motion. They spend a lot of money on things that don't lend itself to war fighting, wasteful spending, a lot of, you know, top heavy stuff, a lot of headquarters, a lot of you know, waste, maybe even some fraud thrown in there. The only army that's capable of fighting is the American army, and it's not as capable as it used to be. But when it comes to the rest of Europe, there's no military that can sustain a fight. They look good on paper. They have a number of units that are good on paper. But watch France scramble if they ever had to come up with 60,000 troops to send to Romania.
Oh.
Watch how they panic and take a battalion here, and then they'll strip all the forces away from this battalion. They'll bring in to get a brigade. They'll strip this away, and basically out of the 400,000 men in the French army, they'll find 60,000 capable of deployment, and that's it. Now they send them over there, and they logistically can't sustain that. But if they did send them into combat, they get chewed up, and there's no replacements. There's no system ready to feed in replacements. And the French are probably better than just about anybody else in the rest of NATO. The British are a joke. Wind blows and they're gone.
If I may, Scott, for a second. Just to give you an example, which I agree with Scott, everything he says here, it's just to illustrate. There was such thing called AOR, Army of the Rhine, which was basically British Army, 55,000, which have been deployed to Germany in the during the Cold War. 55,000, fully ready, so all that, and they of course had their land, units and formations in the island. Just they will be able to get fully combat capable motor rifle or armored brigade. This is give and take 6,000 people, maybe by 2028, which I still think they're gonna fail, but hey, what do I know? But that's just to give you it's complete mess.
Yeah, well, of course, and the other part is they don't have proper air defense, so you really can't fight a battle if you don't have proper air defense. They've done all of this. We're gonna attack a bunch of olive growers and goat herders who can't shoot back and bomb them for 50,000 feet. We're just about out of time. I will ask you this, Scott, and then we'll go to Andre. Your comment on Syria. I'll just throw this. I don't know. This is another where it starts off and people are like, oh, look at this. The neocons have got what they wanted. Oh, they were successful, blah, blah, blah. I looked at it and I'm like, man, this is going to be a disaster. There is going to be an armed resistance. The people are in the streets. It's going to, the the Israelis and the Americans, and especially the Turks, are going to one day say, oh man, this was a bad mistake. That is my opinion. Scott Ritter.
Well, I think of the three, the one that's best prepared for all of this is Turkey, because Erdogan has had a vision of, a resurrection of the Ottoman Empire. So politically, things are happening in a way that he at least projected that he wanted. Whether I think they didn't have all their pieces in play. It's like me saying, honey, we're going to go on a great vacation. I'm thinking we're going to fly to Europe, rent a car, we're going to get a hotel, and then the next morning the taxi pulls up and she's loading bags, and I go, what are we doing? She goes, we're going on the vacation. I said, but honey, that not until the summer. I'm not ready. I'm not ready for this. I haven't. And next thing you know, you're on a vacation that you're not ready on. That's what Erdogan's on right now. Going on a vacation, a pan-Ottoman vacation that he wasn't ready to go on. But he's more prepared than anybody else. The United States, look, all we do is we create, we weaponized Islam back in the 70s to take on the Soviet Union. And then then it got out of control, and it created this thing called Al-Qaeda, and it came back. And then we used Al-Qaeda to achieve what we wanted to achieve in Syria and elsewhere. I mean, I'm sure one day when the CIA's archives are declassified, we're going to find out that there was a whole bunch of weird stuff going on between us and the Islamists, using proxies, using Pakistan, using the Kurds, using the UAE, Saudi Arabia, all the secret back deals that are being made. But we never have a plan for success. We always say we want to do this to create instability, to do this. But then when it happens, we wanted Assad gone. Who steps in? Nobody thought there would be an Al-Qaeda caliphate in Syria. But here it is. We have an Al-Qaeda caliphate in Syria. The black flag has raised, and it ain't going away for 4 years. They're not having free and fair elections. They're in there slaughtering Alawites, slaughtering Christians, slaughtering Druze, slaughtering Sunnis who work for
Scott, let me ask you a question. Isn't like 20-25% or something like that of Turkey Alawites? They got
not Alawite. I think they call them Aliv.
But they're
similar.
They ain't going to be he's going to have some rested. Part of his population is going to be really pissed. Anyway, go ahead and finish.
No, that's actually one of the, if you go and look at the Turkish elections, they don't call them Alawites. It's Aliv or something like that. It's similar. It's against a Shia. It's a Shia offshoot. But they've always played a role in Turkish elections and in the sensitivities for that. Yeah, no, Turkey. But I think, like I said, because Turkey has a significant population, Turkey understands the problems. And so Turkey at least isn't looking at, trying to read the instruction manual. Turkey's going, okay, we know what the problem is. We just weren't ready for this yet, but we're going to try and. I think Turkey's going to come out of this actually quite well, because and I'm not saying that with glee in my voice. I'm just saying it because it's the way it is. I think Turkey's going to get 3 provinces. Idlib, Aleppo, and Raqqa are going to be part of Turkey. And if they play their cards right, they may very well get Mosul and Kirkuk as well, depending on how this thing goes. Turkey is going to take advantage of this to destroy the concept of Greater Kurdistan. And they're going to crush they're going to crush the Kurds, or at least they're going to try to. They may not
the
succeed.
U.S. will abandon the Kurds. We'll abandon
We
them.
always do. We always do. Right now,
we're going to say help. We're going to say who, what.
Kurds have been abandoned by everybody. Let's put it this way, not just United States. So there was a lot of promises even during the Stalin's times. And then, Stalin died there. Hell with it, And so it's just kind of, Kurds have been basically owned by everybody else. Okay, so there you go. That's just the way it is, So they are, I don't know, they're just, unlucky people, I guess. And I'm not saying this, jokingly. I understand their plight and all that, but they also corrupted to utterly, and so
and
they're their own worst enemies. Just like, I hate to say that, but look, let me put it this way, just as a way of illustrating this whole thing. In 1992. I had to lead an inspection into Iraqi Kurdistan to go to this dam where we had intelligence that the Iraqis, there was a dam under construction, I think the Bekmi Dam, And there, you know how when you have a dam, you have the big tunnels where the water comes through and the turbines. So the tunnels have been carved in, and the reports were that the Iraqis had stuffed in a bunch of weapons of mass destruction stuff there, and we needed to get to it. So to get there, we had to land in PUK territory. The Iraqis couldn't come with us because this was Kurdish-controlled territory. So we flew in on our own. There were some United Nations guards that cleared out a landing zone, and I landed. I was the chief inspector, and I had the PUK, which is one of the Kurdish factions. And they said, okay, we're going to take you. But as we went in, on the hills around us, there were other Kurds. And I said, those are your guys? They said, no, those are the other guys. They don't like us too much. And I think it was Barzani and Talabani, and so I think we got picked up by Barzani's people, and then we had to be turned over to the next checkpoint to tell. And these guys were looking at each other like they're getting ready to kill each other. I'm like, what the hell have I got myself into? And then we move on, and then we get turned over to the PJAK, I think it was. They were the Iranian Kurds who operate up in these mountains too. And so we had to pass through to them. And then we finally got turned over to the PKK, which is the Turkish Kurds there. But the point is, none of them got along. They all had little fiefdoms and all this stuff. And we got there, we did the inspection. There was nothing there. It was what we call Kurdant, Kurdish intelligence. I think it was designed to get me to come there so that they all were sitting there saying, we want to work with the United Nations. We want the United States, and here we're helping you. Can you send a good message back to the United States on how great we are and all that stuff? It's a big setup. But we were in more data. The United Nations guards, when we came back, they said, guys, that was the craziest thing in the world, because any one of those checkpoints you went through, you could have died, you should have died, because normally they don't let people go through. That's the kind of animosity that exists. And these are Kurds, but they each have their own fiefdoms, and their own sources of corruption. Their income comes from a variety of things, and they're like mafia gangs. It's like, God, I'm going to get in trouble here, but it's The Godfather. All the Italian families, crime families, is like saying, well, they're all Italians. They get along, right? Because they're all Italians. No, they're competing mafia families, and the Kurds are competing mafia families, and that's how it is. And the Turks are experts at exploiting that. The Iranians are experts at exploiting that. The Iraqis are experts at exploiting that. The Syrian government used to be experts at exploiting that. And all the United States does is come in and lie to them, tell them that we're your best friends. We squeeze what we want out of them, then we abandon them, and they're going to be abandoned again. And I think that's to the benefit of the Israeli. I'll just leave it here with the United States. Look, that there's a too big to fail kind of thing, meaning that we're going to fail, but it's not going to matter. Just like Afghanistan, we failed hugely. It's a huge thing. It doesn't matter today. It's a blip. It doesn't matter. We're going to fail in Syria. It doesn't matter. We're going to fail in Iraq. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. Ukraine is different. We fail in Ukraine, that resonates, it gets, that hurts. But all this Middle East failure doesn't matter. It doesn't really impact us, because what replaces it is chaos and anarchy. That we sit back, then the CIA comes back in and starts doing what the CIA thrives in chaos and anarchy, because that's where people start deviating from the rule of law, and the CIA picks up on human frailty, starts recruiting people, playing them off against one another. And next thing you know, we're back there playing puppet master once again, putting the money out there, running the drugs, doing what we do, which is criminality on a global scale. Israel, this is the real wild card in here. Israel dodged a bullet with the collapse of Assad, and Israel has done a good job of exploiting this. But there's a couple things that are going to come up and bite Israel in the butt. First of all is Lebanon. The ceasefire, was a 60-day ceasefire. Israel is violating it like you wouldn't believe. And Israel has occupied southern Lebanon, and Israel said, we're not getting out. If you want to delegitimize Hezbollah, the worst thing in the world you could do is occupy Lebanese territory, because that's what Hezbollah does for a living, is kick Israelis out of Lebanese territory. And Hezbollah said, we're going to do it again. And there's no way Lebanon goes against them. If Hezbollah said, we're going to take the fight to Israel, I think the Lebanese people and government say, no. Israel is occupying southern Lebanon right now. And Hezbollah will have a green light to do whatever it takes to get the Israelis out. And Israel is going to get bogged down into a very costly thing if they don't withdraw. That's one brewing thing. The other one is Netanyahu's health. And, we talked about Putin and what happens after Putin goes away. Israel doesn't have a succession plan for post Netanyahu. When he goes, Israel's going to be in a lot of trouble. And I think the role that's going to be played by the United States is putting a protective cocoon around Israel while it deals with these issues. Our job now is to protect and preserve Israel while it sorts out the problems of its internal dysfunction. And then if Israel can get through that, and I think they will, I think eventually you'll get some sort of moderate center, which isn't good for the Palestinians because there's nobody in Israel, there's no left anymore. There's nobody in Israel who's actively working for a Palestinian state. So even though we get rid of the far right fanatics, all they're doing is getting rid of the people that are trying to destroy Israel's internal political cohesion. Almost every Israeli agrees that Gaza needs to be leveled and depopulated and all that. I mean, that's consensus. So I think the United States is going to put a protective cover while Israel recovers domestically. And then we're going to try and breathe life into the Abrams Accords. And because the Sunni Arab world is despicable and dishonest and dysfunctional as anything in the world, and we own it, we control it, we will get them to all go in with the normalization of relations with Israel, etc. The wild card, of course, is Iran. But I think Iran right now is looking for a negotiated way out. If the conversations held between the Iranian foreign minister and the Turkish foreign minister are accurate, according to what the Turkish foreign minister is saying, Iran is desperately looking for a negotiated settlement with the United States to avoid conflict with Israel and the United States. The last thing Iran wants today is a war. So all those people out there saying, well, I can't wait for True Promise 3. I don't think True Promise 3 is ever going to happen. I think Iran right now is off the war path and is looking for the peace path. And the United States will be the one that'll do that through negotiation. But so that's what I think.
Two quick questions. We'll end it at this, but two questions, important questions for Andre. Number one, does Russia stay in Syria? Number two, what about the rumors I'm hearing that Russia and Iran are going to sign some kind of a military agreement?
Oh, it's not a rumor. 17th of January. And it's going to be a full-blown military alliance. So that is why it's, Mr. Lavrov is already on record on that. I mean, there will be a huge portion of this comprehensive agreement, which involves the foreign relations and military cooperation in preserving the security of Iran and Russia, and of course, all kinds of other fluffy things which come after that, including the fight with the terrorism. And that opens the door to what Israel probably is observing with the dread, especially after the even Iranian air defense, pretty much indigenous, most of it, performed quite well. And now they suddenly will have this, all those funny things rolling from Russia officially. And again, rumors have it that Su-35s are already there. And as per basis, well, I mean, this Giuliani, not Giuliani. He stated, I mean, we don't want Russians to go, So the Russians say, yeah, okay, we're staying for now. And don't forget, in some sense, it's the stabilizing presence for the Latakia province, which is primarily Alawite and Christian. There are many of those. So it's probably for the good of it. And, well, they will negotiate some kind of presence. And Israel probably not going to be happy either. So who knows? But Russia is staying there for now. And Russians do not bother too much with it, because evidently the decision about the fate of Assad was made between Moscow and Tehran. That's what is, I think so, is now pretty clear, because Russians and Iranians stated, we're not going to fight for you anymore, period. And I know there are many details from Syria, what was happening there and what Syrian Arab army generals were doing, They were not training troops or fighting. So they were doing completely different things. So,
well, I'm going to show you guys one last thing on the way out. This is interesting. Cybertruck explosion, suspect war Ukrainian neo-Nazi shirt.
The guy is a Green Beret. He basically, you know what, destroyed Green Beret's reputation. What kind of Green Beret drives the freaking Cybertruck? You know, that is just pathetic, man. Green Beret should be riding, you know, F-150 Rams, you know, things like that nature, you know. At most, Toyota Tacoma Tundra. To drive for the special forces, the Cybertruck. Oh, come on! Don't they have the, you know, honor anymore? You know,
You might as well have been in one of those.
Come on!
You
It's
might as well have been in one of those new electric Jaguars for,
yeah,
for
I mean,
you
like
know,
Tesla,
humiliate
God,
yourself.
good Lord. Can you imagine the guy from some, you know, I mean, the Ranger unit? Oh, yeah, I bought myself Tesla. It's like, dude, go screw yourself.
I think he rented it though. I don't think he owned it. I think he rented
well,
it. Yeah.
Still, I mean, you wouldn't even touch it, you know, just to, you know, your reputation, you know, to suffer so badly. So,
But he was with the 10th Special Forces Group out of Germany. They have the mission of training Ukrainian forces, but he's not just with the 10th. He was with the SIF, which is the commander's something force.
yeah.
Basically the emergency response force of 10th Group. It's highly trained unit. He was also trained in what they call ATOC, which is Advanced Tactical Operations. This is the guy that was in Ukraine training Ukrainian special forces and to do, you know, the Ukrainian special forces have had some very good successes against the Russians. They have run a number of operations that have been very, very successful. They've infiltrated, and he's the guy that trained them. He's part of that team. So, you know, the question you have to ask yourself is, and first of all, again, the fact that, you know, he's special forces means that he's supposed to be attuned to the culture of the people that he's supporting. He's wearing a Slava Ukraina Azov shirt, tells you that he knows, and everybody in the United States knows, the Nazi roots of these people that they're training. That they're, you know, you can't sit there and tell me, oh, they're not Nazis. I've never seen it. You're wearing a Nazi shirt. So we train Nazis. We know we train Nazis. He's proved that. Apparently tomorrow there's going to be a manifesto that he has written where he names names. I mean, he has apparently some very big grudges against people about what American policy in Ukraine. He's a true believer. This is a guy who sold his soul to train the Nazis to take on the Russians. He hates the Russians. He wants the Russians defeated. He's a true believer in that regard. And apparently he is aware of policy decisions, or at least trends, that move in a direction where he feels it betrays the people he trained. So there's a manifesto. I think the U.S. government is frantic.
Yeah, generally speaking, he's not a very bright fellow. Let's put it this way. So, yeah, it just pretty much tells you everything you need to know about the guy. Yeah, and yeah, but well, he blew himself up. So, and he had Cybertruck too, you know. So,
and add this. So now we've got the guy on the fifth hole that was after Trump, and he's came back from Ukraine. Now we got a guy that blew up a Cybertruck. So symbolically, I guess he's blowing up Musk or something.
Musk, yeah, maybe Musk.
So I'm just saying, if those guys are so supporting the Ukrainian,
not very bright. Yeah,
they are really going about it in the wrong way.
Yeah, they are not that bright. Yeah,
but at any rate, thanks a lot, guys. Certainly appreciate it. Don't forget, everybody.
Right, deserted. Due to all these desertions, the Ukrainian army is literally melting down in plain sight, faster than my dreams of becoming a pro athlete. At this point, it's a systemic issue that leads entire Ukrainian units to disintegrate before even reaching the front. This crisis was more or less concealed by the mainstream media up until recently, when it was too big to hide. Here on the 29th of November, AP News reported desertion threatens to starve Ukraine's forces at a crucial time in its war with Russia. Meanwhile, this is what Ukrainian news agency Union said. Entire units are fleeing. Shortly after, on December 1st, the Financial Times investigated this crisis and wrote, Ukraine struggles to recruit new soldiers as desertions rise.
We are winning!
Are we surprised though? When we know that the first mission of these Ukrainian conscripts that are forcefully mobilized looks like the game green light, red light from Squid Game. Meanwhile, we also learned that the sheer volume of desertions make it impossible for law enforcement to control. Honestly, what a disaster. To make up for the loss, Ukraine had a creative and brilliant idea. That's right, draft another 160,000 men between November and February. 40,000 people mobilized per month. And we all know how this will end. More desertions. So in this video, we will try to understand the scale of this phenomenon, try to explain why it is happening, and explore the possible solutions laid out by the armed forces of Ukraine. Spoilers, one of the brilliant ideas of the genius bar leading the Ukrainian army was the decriminalization of desertion. Can you guess what happened next?
Madness. Madness and stupidity.
Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukraine war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads, so make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. According to Ukrainian law, there are two types of desertion. You have Article 4 or 7, unauthorized abandonment of a unit, or samovilne zalishesnie частини in Ukrainian, marked by this acronym you can see on screen. Americans would say AWOL, absent without official leave, but without intent to desert. Essentially soldiers that run away and abandon their combat positions during a battle, for example. For Article 4.7, a Ukrainian soldier can face up to 10 years in prison. And then you have Article 4.8, desertion, to leave a unit with the intention of never returning to service. For this crime, a Ukrainian soldier can face up to 12 years in prison. I know there's a big gray area in between Article 4.7 and Article 4.8, but you know, it's the beauty of idiocracy, bureaucracy. So how many Ukrainian deserters are we even talking about? Obviously, it's difficult to estimate the exact number, but let's start with the lowest estimates. Officially, Ukrainian prosecutors opened 60,000 cases of desertion between January and October 2024. 40,000 of these cases were for unauthorized abandonment, and about 20,000 for actual desertion. That way, they can claim that officially there are only 20,000 deserters.
A great success!
However, to what extent can we even trust these official figures? According to certain sources, the AFU had to deal with 9,500 cases of desertion in October alone. But then came the worrying numbers for November. According to rumors, an extra 19,000 new criminal proceedings were registered under Articles 407 and 408. Let's have a look at this Facebook post by Andriy Pisarenko, a commander of a mortar battery of the infamous Da Vinci Wolves Battalion. He said that the problem is how these cases are only the ones where officers submitted reports for. But many commanders never actually send these reports on their fighters who have gone AWOL to their superiors in the hierarchy. More often than not, because commanders are afraid of punishment, since the status of their personnel is their responsibility. According to anecdotal evidence, one Ukrainian soldier said there were 6 criminal proceedings for desertion in his unit, while 27 cases have not been entered yet in the database, and that will probably just be shoved under the rug. So according to this example, the actual rate of desertion would be 5 times higher than the one officially announced. If we go back to April 2024, Arestovich, the former advisor to President Zelensky, already spoke of 100,000 deserters.
Кто-то пробовал говорить всерьез со 100 тысячами уклонистов?
Most of which were not even mobilized personnel dragged from the streets and stuffed into vans, but actual combat veterans, many of whom had volunteered and fought since 2022. A couple days later, on the 26th of April, Ukrainian lawyer Rostislav Kraviets also mentioned over 100,000 deserters. This was in spring 2024. But since then, the situation at the front deteriorated quickly. You can imagine the scale of this desertion crisis by now. How many more Ukrainian soldiers may have deserted between summer, fall, and winter of 2024? In December, Union wrote that according to some reports, the real number of deserters may have reached 200,000 people.
Hasta la vista, baby.
You heard that right, 200,000 deserters. More than the combined Polish, German, Dutch, and British ground forces. All I can say is that, wow, that NATO training really paid off. Actually, now that I remember, it was also mentioned that a number of Ukrainian soldiers used the opportunity of being trained abroad to desert and escape into the wilderness. Now, the problem is that due to all these desertions, the rate of mobilization in Ukraine was only enough to hit 2/3 of what the AFU needs to stay afloat. That's why Ukraine increased the rate of mobilized personnel from 30,000 per month to 40,000 per month. Because on top of the war of attrition, the general staff of the AFU is now even taking into account the growing number of desertions, whose gaps have to be filled up with replacements. I don't want to jab Ukraine, but in comparison, Russia only opened 10,000 cases for desertion. Let's just say that the Russians are more strict on that matter. The biggest disaster for Ukraine is not only having to deal with desertion, but also with what Ukrainians call shabuning. This is when a soldier is formally counted in a platoon, company, or battalion, but bribes his commanding officer to be stationed somewhere at the rear or just stay at home, where he can work a 9-to-5 job. Yes, that's right, the exact same thing that I told you about the Syrian army. I read this report about a Ukrainian rifle platoon of 30 men, where only 12 soldiers were really there in the trenches. The others were assigned to what they call the Kiev Restaurants Brigade. In the end, these guys have their military papers in order, so they cannot be bothered by the TCC agents, all the while cashing their army pay and working some side job instead of bearing the burden of military service. Now let's explore the 5 main reasons that lead to such high desertion rates among the ranks of the Ukrainian army. Reason number 1 is because Ukraine is losing the war. I know it's harsh, but that's the reality. I mean, just look at the situation at the front. Who's making more gains? As you can see on this graph, it's not a surprise how the number of cases of desertions drastically increased between 2022 and 2024. And we all know that historically speaking, it's always the army that is losing that suffers the most from desertion. The second reason, which is often mentioned in the mainstream media, is battle fatigue and the lack of rotations, which naturally leads to a significant drop in the morale of the troops. You all remember how on the 21st of September 2024, a Ukrainian soldier named Serhiy Gnezdilov, attached to the 56th Motorized Brigade, made a video to publicly announce that he was voluntarily leaving the unit. He called it voluntary demobilization. Same story for Kirill Babi, lieutenant in the 43rd Ukrainian Artillery Brigade. Like many men, he volunteered in February 2022, but already by November 2023, on Instagram he wrote, "I don't want to spend 3 more years in the war. I'm exhausted." On the 27th of February 2024, marking the 2nd anniversary of the war, Lieutenant Babi deserted and never returned. About this issue of battle fatigue, one battalion commander told AP, "At this stage, I do not condemn any of the soldiers from my battalion that deserted, because everyone is just really tired. Reality is the men that composed this patriotic army of the volunteers from 2022, while they're tired, they're exhausted, they can't take it anymore, especially since they see no way out."
Hey, don't.
No, Russia only do
Can't take anymore. Okay.
And the problem is that there are barely any rotations for the grunts sitting in the trenches week after week, month after month, year after year. Even worse, leaves are often cancelled by commanding officers because there's always another Russian attack to counter, and all military personnel is needed at the front. There's another reason why leaves are constantly cancelled, but more on that later. In the end, some units stay on the line forever. We all remember the men of the 110th Mechanized Brigade that held the Avdiivka sector from March 2022 all the way until the first weeks of 2024. Or what about the 72nd Mechanized Brigade that defended Vuhledar from August 2022 until the fall of the city in October 2024? It's not a surprise that because of this factor, 20% of the soldiers of the 72nd Brigade marked as missing had in reality gone AWOL or outright deserted. In this article, Ukrainska Pravda talked about yet another combat unit facing the same problem. The guys worked on the front from October 2022 to June 2024. They were in positions for 20 months participating in battles. Now they're worn out, exhausted, psychologically traumatized. Eventually, the general staff woke up and allowed these men 4 weeks for rest and recovery at the rear.
No.
Instead of normal recovery, they were put together into a BTG and sent to the Kursk region. Because of that, many fighters simply said goodbye and went home. Do you understand this is not RT reporting this story, but Ukrainska Pravda? In his Facebook post, Andrei Pisarenko said, "How can you call deserter a soldier that has been fighting since 2014, but that refused to take back some useless position in the no man's land? How can you call deserter a young man that volunteered in February 2022, but that has since then been wounded multiple times and that refused to take part in a senseless frontal assault without any armored support?" I have to go back to this interview by Colonel Vahramiev of the 1st Presidential Operational Brigade. He admitted to Pravda, "We've been standing here for a year. No one is going home. It's hard to plan any maneuver with tired people. They need a break. I believe that after 6 months of active fighting, we should leave for at least 3 months. But to achieve this exact thing, the only way for Ukraine to grow their army is by TCC agents snatching people off the streets and shoving them into buses going towards training camps. The third reason for this mass desertion is due to poor training. Nowadays, most replacements came into the army as part of Zelensky's busification program. In other words, through mobilization. Every month, 20 to 30,000 men are drafted across Ukraine, although the number now is closer to 40,000 men. We covered it many times. Training is too short. If a recruit gets 1 month of training, he's very lucky. And overall, the training program is just inadequate. Soldiers are only taught the basics of how to handle an AK. Instead of gradually acclimating these mobilized troops to the reality of war, they're often sent right into some of the hottest parts of the front, right into the furnace. The shock is so intense that after their first taste of battle, many Mobics are just looking for ways to avoid being sent to the front again, to the extent where a lot of guys now see mobilization as a death sentence. And they're not completely wrong, because it is estimated that 50 to 70% of new infantry troops are KIA or wounded within days of starting their first rotation. To me, it's just a wasteful and almost criminal use of human resources. And it gets worse. With such rates of attrition, it also doesn't help that Ukrainian commanders regularly pull cooks, air defense specialists, even medics right into depleted rifle companies. And when the press interviewed some Ukrainian commanders about this, you know what they replied? Yeah, well, sometimes we have no choice. That's how an artillery crewman was assigned to an infantry unit by his CO for a month, after discovering that his new position as a rifleman was made permanent without his knowledge. What do you think happened next? The artilleryman deserted. I also read reports stating that hundreds of mobilized personnel flee from training camps.
Screw you guys, I'm going home.
Let's pause a second and think of the effects this has on the troops. Imagine you're in a rifle squad, and week after week you have more soldiers deserting, one after the other. You would ask yourself, why am I sitting in this trench risking my life when all the others are at home? Okay, so all this was on the individual level, but the lack of encadrement or command structure sometimes leads entire units to abandon their brand new fortifications and just run away from the battlefield. And as you know, desertions cause this chain reaction of panic. If I remember correctly, in April 2024, it's the massive desertion of the entire 115th Mechanized Brigade that led to the Russian breakthrough in Ocheretine. In September, one battalion commander told CNN how his flank was left exposed after soldiers from neighboring units abandoned their positions without reporting it. There's also the story of the 123rd Territorial Defense Brigade near Vuhledar. First, it was the 186th Battalion that broke rank, and the next day was the infantrymen of the 187th Battalion that abandoned their combat positions, forcing the 72nd Brigade to abandon Vuhledar in a hurry. These territorial defense guys explained how the general staff didn't even provide their units with PKMs or machine guns to hold their trenches. This battalion of the territorial defense was only composed of 100 men, 20% of the actual strength of this unit. After this incident, the 100 soldiers of the 187th Territorial Defense Battalion simply returned to their home region of Mykolaiv and even staged a protest to complain about the unrealistic expectations of the general staff. We can also mention the complete disintegration of the newly formed 155th Mechanized Brigade due to 1,700 cases of desertion before even reaching the front. But I think that deserves its own analysis. Reason number 4 is that a lot of Ukrainian soldiers feel a great sense of injustice when it comes to their situation. On social media, they see how everyone is living normally at the rear. Some of them are living their best life as if there wasn't even a war going on. One Ukrainian soldier exceptionally managed to get a leave, and this is what he experienced upon his arrival in Kyiv. I drive past bars, cafes, restaurants, they're all packed. What the bliat are we dying at the front for? While everyone else is sitting in pubs. Not gonna lie, I would be pissed as well. Many soldiers don't understand the big gap between normal life of civilians in Kyiv and their sacrifice on the battlefield. Actually, Gnezdilov, the deserter of the 56th Motorized Brigade, explained how one of the main reasons he left was because he was also fed up with the corruption that allows a person to avoid being drafted in exchange for a certain amount of cash. Ukrainian soldiers are not blind. They can clearly see the thousands of Ukrainian men that are not mobilized, often part of the wealthier part of Ukrainian society, while at the same time factory workers don't have the same privileges, as they never made nearly enough money to be able to bribe government officials and get their ticket out of the draft. But to the eyes of the Ukrainian general staff, even a man who has nothing can still offer his life.
Pity the gods, man.
So in the end, how can impoverished and bussified military personnel get out of this hell? Desertion. The final reason behind Ukraine's high desertion rates is simply because of the lack of organization or a lack of understanding of the basic fundamentals of a large military structure. You see, after sustaining a combat injury, soldiers are allowed a medical leave. Typically, they're sent to hospitals in Dnipro or Kyiv to get surgery or to get treated. By the time they have recovered, many soldiers don't feel like returning to the front. Once they step out of the hospital, they simply go home. Same thing for soldiers on leave. They're losing track of permissioners, guys on leaves, losing track of deserters, losing track of wounded soldiers that recovered, losing track of the actual strength of rifle companies. Yet the SBU won't lose track of any dissenting journalist. At the same time, as a Ukrainian commander, it's really a catch-22 type of situation. If you don't grant leaves, your men will be exhausted and will eventually desert. If you do grant leaves for rest and recovery, you have a 50-50 chance that they never return to the unit.
Fuck.
Another problem that is often mentioned by deserters is the complicated system to transfer units. You see, a lot of Ukrainian commanders still have this Soviet mentality where they see their troops just like a resource. Soldiers are often beaten up. The Ukrainian army system remains outdated, and transferring from one combat unit to another still requires permission from the same commander soldiers are trying to get away from. Surprise, surprise, a transfer which is often denied. In the end, when you're stuck with donkeys leading your formation, the only way to quickly change units is through desertion. Ukraine also seems to lack the political will to truly go after all these deserters. By doing so, they have to open cases, and the true scale of the crisis would be open to the public. In contrast, one Ukrainian commander said that the Russian army has much stricter military discipline and much harsher punishments for desertion as well. Actually, the Russian military has entire military police battalions tracking down these deserters. And let's just say 20 years in prison is the best case scenario they can expect.
And we shoot deserters.
Meanwhile, there's less fear among Ukrainian soldiers of the consequences of abandoning their combat posts. Anyway, everyone says that there's so many deserters at this point that authorities are simply powerless. One of the main reasons behind this could be that in 2019, Ukraine completed the dissolution of military courts, transferring their functions to civilian judicial institutions. But as you can see, in times of crisis, it's not really working out. Now, what kind of solutions did the Ukrainian armed forces think about to solve this crisis? From what soldiers serving in the AFU told me, the more drastic change would be to reinstate military tribunals, followed by the creation of NKVD type of military police detachments just like the Russians, whose job would be to catch deserters. Alternatively, these detachments would be posted behind the front line to prevent entire units from fleeing. The soldiers said that this should be combined with a severe crackdown on corruption, which is the root of all evil in Ukraine. But for now, Ukraine preferred the soft approach. First idea in spring by increasing payments. The Kyiv Independent wrote, personnel serving at the zero line will get the additional financial reward together with a monthly salary of 20 to 25,000 hryvnias, or 500 to 600 USD, plus combat payments of 100,000 hryvnias, or $2,500. Then again in July, Ukraine introduces new incentives for military personnel, with active servicemen eligible for additional remuneration of 100,000 hryvnias. But as you can see, this didn't work. Then in November came the idea of decriminalization of desertion. Military personnel that deserted have until January 1st, 2025 to re-enlist in order to avoid criminal charges. Apparently, this brought some positive results. In the first week of December, some 3,000 servicemen returned to their units. Is it going to be enough though? Especially since military psychologist Andriy Kozinchuk claimed that with the decriminalization, even more soldiers use this opportunity to say hasta la vista. Then came US advisors. They suggested lowering the age of mobilization to 18 years old to replenish the ranks of the AFU, essentially until the last Ukrainian. Meanwhile, Ukrainian journalist Asef urges Ukrainian authorities to consider a gradual demobilization. He believes it would be fair to release from service as many soldiers as are drafted into the army. That would mean for every 40,000 men that are mobilized, 40,000 are demobilized. In theory, within 10 months, you would have the entire AFU standing at the front be brought to the rear. The other objective would be to increase the number of volunteers using financial incentives and fixed-term contracts. Essentially, the Russian army recruitment model that I mentioned in this video. ASEF suggested 3 to 6 months tours of duty. Sounds great on paper, not sure it will work. Because for this to work, every man in Ukraine would have to spend at least 1 tour of duty at the front at some point. I mean, good luck with that. In the meantime, many units in Ukraine like Azov prefer to organize their own recruitment campaigns, as they only take in volunteers. They said they're even willing to enlist some of the former deserters. But many of the commanders of Azov are also understandably reluctant to the idea. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If
What is your take on Russia today, its economy, its political stability, its reputation in the international community, its likely triumph in Ukraine?
I think all of what you said about Russia is so. It's got a thriving economy. If there's a problem, it's just that it's humming very fast. I'm not talking about energy, but if you go to Siberia or any of those provinces, I mean, it's just buzzing with activity. There's a middle class that is now becoming consumers and So it's becoming a sort of wider economy. It's settled. It's not. It's very pragmatic. It's looking about what it is to be Russian. It's a complex issue. It really goes back to Byzantium to really understand what Russians mean by Russia. But that is taking place and shape. So I would say it's stronger than it's ever been. I think what's facing them and the challenge that they see ahead is basically the challenge of how to deal with the United States in this coming period when Trump will become president and will seek a discussion with Russia and with Putin. And I think, why is it difficult? I think it's going to be difficult, and I've said that before, because firstly, I don't think there is a deep understanding, perhaps a misbriefing of some of the envoys about what Russia sees as the solution to Ukraine. It's very clear what Russia thinks about Ukraine. It's not interested in a ceasefire, frozen conflict, any of those things. What it is interested in is a permanent solution to Ukraine. By that, they mean a big picture talk with Trump, a big picture, not just the minutiae of Ukraine, but how to come to some sort of understanding between, if you like, Central Asia, the heartland of Asia, and with the Western Atlanticist group of countries. Where does it stop? Where does this whole process, the expansion of NATO that was promised at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall, would never move forward? How far does it move forward? Do they really have the right to say it's none of anybody's business where we take NATO? We can put it on your doorstep and you can't complain because we have that right. It's a discussion about that and about missiles that needs to be had. But I think that the problem, if I put it like this, is more acute, because I don't think America, indeed the West, is prepared for this. They're not prepared to see a strong Russia emerge. They've been conditioned to see it as being weak. They're conditioned to seeing it, if you like, as a sort of backward state, heavily conditioned for a long time. And I think also there's another aspect that makes this so difficult for there to be an agreement. It is really also because I don't think that they understand Russia and what's happened, and because partly because the United States has, if you like, given up its, if you like, its national values. Not completely, of course not. There is an American culture, but that American culture is, if you like, has been suppressed and has been replaced in the 70s, where they swapped out national values, the traditional values of America, for identity politics. And they did that because they wanted to move us away from what was a democracy at the time. They wanted to move us towards, if you like, technocracy, a technocracy that, if you like, is the corporate, multinational corporates, multinational energy, multinational bankers as the experts. These are the only people that can make a serious decision about our future and design our future. And it's Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was a national security advisor to Carter at that time, wrote this book, forecasting the technocratic era and saying that humanity needs to leave the nation state concept, get rid of the nation state concept and accept the sort of technocracy that would manage and would create a sort of sphere of identity which would be controlled and manipulated for the purpose of serving, if you like, the new corporatist future that he foresaw for America. And that this has great consequences for doing a deal on Ukraine, because this identity politics has been used in Ukraine to try and present Ukraine, or at least the west of Ukraine, west of the Dnieper River, as Europe, and that the other part is Slav, and to create a cultural conflict, if you like, between European Ukraine, based on its identity that it's somehow more European than Slav, against Asia and the values of Asia. And of course, the European Union jumped on this. They were delighted to find this new tool of unity that they could use, because their own unity was fraying quickly. And Ukraine suddenly became the pole of unity around which Europe could try and gather and recreate, if you like, Europe as a powerful actor on the stage. And I think what you're seeing, and coming, turning a bit to Syria, look at the world. Everywhere there is upheaval taking place. Everywhere there is crisis. It's not just France. It's not just Germany. It's Romania. It's Moldova. It's even South Korea. So everywhere we see this. And what is going on, I think, is finally the sort of pushback against that corporatist vision, that identitarian politics that eventually became wokeism, that Brzezinski pursuing in his book about the technocratic era to come, the pushback against that, because the world is just fed up with Western nihilism. They want to find something that has meaning. They want to find something that has value in life, and to get back to their own values, civilizational values. And the problem is that I don't think in the team around Trump probably understands what Russia means by that it sees itself as a civilizational state and not just as another nation state. And that's what's important to them. And it has to be negotiated on those sort of understandings, and not simply about, shall we freeze this here? Shall we freeze it there? No, they want a permanent solution, which means a new security architecture for Central Asia and for Europe that puts frontiers, puts limits on behavior, puts limits on missiles.
Do you think that the elites in Europe and the neocons in the State Department and the people around Trump understand the Russian mentality, the Russian vitality, the Russian self-perception, and that their grand experiment, I'm not talking about the people around Trump, but the elites in Europe now and the neocons in the State Department, their grand experiment in Ukraine has been a colossal failure?
A complete failure. And of course, this is part of the difficulties that Russia is having to cope with, because how do you negotiate with Trump in such a way that he can present this as a success? The last thing, Trump stands for, making America great, America's leadership, all of these things. And what Russia is trying to do is to usher him slowly along the path of multipolar world, where America will be an important state amongst equals, amongst a concert of powers, but not the hegemon dictating to the world what it believes and what its vision for the future is. That's what's been rejected almost across the globe. But it's a very difficult thing to understand. How can Trump do it? And I believe the only way he can do it, really, is by actually going up the, if you like, metaphysical stairs with Russia and saying, let's do a big deal. Let's talk about how Russia and China and Iran interact with the West and how we can manage that, what are the guardrails, how we can do that. And do you know what? That is a victory, because what I'm doing is saving America from the Third World War. because otherwise we would go on forever. If we go on as we're going, we walk this sort of delicate cusp of escalation, of possible escalation. If we don't get a specific agreement on Ukraine, then things may escalate. And escalate, who knows, to nuclear war or whatever. I'm going to save you from that. The problem is that, I don't think America's really been prepared for the sense of, if you like, that decision to change to being a multipolar power rather than a hegemon. And so it's trying to find a way of getting victory out of a failure. And that's not easy. And I think that's why, maybe he can conceive it and he can reconfigure it in a way which is more important. How do we finally solve all these problems so that we actually put a World War III, that we don't walk along that precipice of potential escalation that could lead anywhere at any time? And that's why I think the only way to do this is actually go big picture, not little picture. And I think that maybe, I think Trump has sent signals that he can do this. I'm not sure that the people around him understand it as well.
Very interesting series of observations. Switching over to the events in Syria at the tail end of last year, who or what was the prime mover in the demise of President Assad's regime?
Well, it's connected with what we were just talking about, because the other thing that Brzezinski produced, going back to the turmoil of the 70s in the United States, when America sort of gave up its traditional values in favor of identity politics. It was Brzezinski that took identitarian politics and weaponized it. First of all, in Afghanistan, which I recall, where he tried to use Islamist, jihadist fighters to overthrow the government in Kabul and bring Russia into a quagmire in Afghanistan. And of course, we've been using, if you like, jihadists, these Islamist identities against secular states ever since. And of course, that's just what we've done in Syria. We've used, if you like, HTS, an ISIS rebrand, in order to create a coup d'etat in Syria. Now, what's it all about? You ask, what is it all about? Well, I think it's very clear what this coup is about. It is essentially, what do they say? What does Jolani al-Shara say? He says, look, I'm open to business coming here and investing. I'm open to oil companies, energy companies coming here. I'm open to all of it. And you know what? I want to normalize with Israel. So I think, he's saying it so clearly that this is another process of normalization, trying to normalize the field for Israel. The kings, the emirs of the Gulf normalized long ago. They are all, stuck to their Bloomberg terminals and are thoroughly sort of, if you like, normalized. But the resistance axis wasn't. And so now coup d'etat has been mounted using the same tools that Brzezinski was outlining in his grand chess book, and using that to undermine it, but to create normalization. And this has been an ongoing project, and Turkey was a part of it, but the West has been trying to find a way of creating, and what do they call it? Technocratic Salafism. It tells you everything. I mean, it was part of the technocratic plan that Brzezinski was outlining for the future of America, the future, to get rid of the values. And here you have a state, the values of Syria, 5,000-year-old values on a diffuse, well-entrenched society. And he wants to swap them out for a technocratic government that is aligned with corporate businesses of the world, of corporate enterprises, the oligarchs, the energy, the banking cartels. And it's entirely in line with, if you like, that form. And that's why I called it imperial hubris, because it has a double meaning. Yes, it's hubris by Turkey, Ottoman-esque, Ottoman hubris,
Right.
but being used by the imperial forces back in Washington. The imperial forces are using Turkish hubris to bring about a sort of, if you like, a corporatist structure that will normalize that part of the region with Israel. This has been planned for about 40 years from the clean break strategy, how to normalize the whole of the region with Israel. And part of this plan is unfolding with Israel pursuing what I call, the Leviathan, total war to disrupt the Middle East and make it subservient to Israel, and that is proceeding. And now we're talking about, if you like, we're talking about Yemen, as well as Syria, as well as Lebanon, as well as Gaza, all being destroyed, massive destruction. For what purpose? The destruction is the purpose. And that is, I think this is on course. It contains the seeds of its own self-destruction, I believe, because the Leviathan is, if you like, an irrational process as such. So that is, I think, what we're seeing unfolding in Syria, and who's behind it and what is behind it. It's the normalization of the region. And I think one of the great dangers, I said earlier, we were talking about Ukraine and how to try and allow President Trump, which he will be then, to present whatever is agreed with Putin as a triumph, as a victory, that he hasn't conceded American greatness, he hasn't conceded American leadership of the world. Well, unfortunately, I think the only one way of balancing it out might be the one advocated by some of his, if you like, aides and allies, which would be to bomb Iran and show American virility by, if you like, annihilating the Iranian state. I hope that won't happen, but it's a possibility.
This is a fascinating analysis. You mentioned Jelani. We're going to play two clips. You'll see him and hear him with an English translation, of course, looking and sounding very much like a Western diplomat. Chris, run cut number one and then immediately cut number two.
Russia is an important country and is considered the second most powerful country in the world. And there are deep strategic interests between Syria and Russia. There are deep strategic interests between Syria and Russia. Syrian weapons are all Russian. Many of the power plants are Russian with Russian expertise, and there are great cultural ties between Syria and Russia. We do not want Russia to exit Syria, as some would like. Syria cannot continue without relations with a large regional country like Iran, but they must be based on diplomatic relations, respect for the sovereignty of the two countries, non-interference in internal affairs, and only relations that are compatible with the interests of the two countries without interfering in the matters of sectarian hatreds. We hope that the new American administration will not follow in the same approach of the previous administration in continuing these sanctions, and will lift them without entering into negotiations or bargaining.
Hard to believe that 3 months ago he was butchering, figuratively and literally, his opponents in a public square.
Years ago, when I was quite young and naive, probably still am, but I went to Washington from Afghanistan, and I gave a talk to policymakers there. And I said, watch out for Al-Qaeda, which is just shaping there. And not so much Al-Qaeda, it was Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was the most sinister. And I said, you've got to discriminate. You've got to understand these groups. Some of them are going to be very dangerous to Muslims, to other people. And you will end up with bombs in your cities. And I remember being taken by a senior American senator who sort of condescendingly put his arm around my shoulders and he said, listen, those people you warn us against, they sure kick communist ass. And, you know, I'm sure they're saying, listen, Alistair, those people you're warning us against, the Julanis, now in a suit, now saying all the right normalization words towards Israel. Listen, he does exactly, this is exactly what we want. He's kicking out the resistance. He's kicking the resistance backside, and he's going to normalize with Israel. Isn't that a success?
Well, Alistair, fascinating stuff. Very much appreciate you coming on with us today. It's not your usual day. Today seems like a Monday.
Friday, January 3rd, 2025. Our friend Larry Johnson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
If I thought, started the new year, I thought your New Year's resolution was to get rid of me. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's get started, Larry, with what has happened in the United States. Here is the picture of these suspects. These three. The first one is that one that has
Shamsuddin Jabbar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's connected to the, I don't know, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, somewhere, and the other two. What's going on, Larry? They're talking about, all of them they went to Fort Bragg. How do you find it right now? What's the connection between these suspects?
Yeah, the fact that so Shamsuddin is a former member of the U.S. Army, but the guy was a human resources officer and a IT guy, so he wasn't a combat infantryman. He wasn't trained extensively with weaponry, and he was not in the kinds of units like at the John Fitzgerald Kennedy School, where the Green Berets, special operations folks, are trained. He wasn't special operations at all. Whereas that Matthew Liverskill, I think is his name, he was special forces. He had a Green Beret. So just the fact that they had both been at Fort Bragg at some point doesn't mean that they were eating in the same mess hall. Not at all. They were different parts of the base. Very, very unlikely that they came into contact. That's number one. The other guy, Ruth, is the one who was caught with a rifle trying to shoot at Trump at the
guy in the middle.
Yeah, the guy in the middle, the pink shirt. The fact that he was on Fort Bragg is sort of odd because he's not military. And to get on if you're a contractor, like I was a contractor, but I had a badge that got me onto the base. So just the fact that he was getting onto the base, it does raise some suspicion about who was he dealing with, what was going on. I think the real nexus here involves Ukraine, because Mr. Pink Shirt and then Matt here, who we're seeing with his Slava Ukraine shirt, both had fairly significant ties to Ukraine in different facets. Matt, it turns out, was, and I'm going off of the press reports. Some of the press reports say that he is currently stationed at Panzer Kaiser. So Kaiser, that base is right outside of Stuttgart, just a little bit south and east of the village of town of Sindelfingen. I've spent a lot of time there over the years because that's the headquarters for both European Command and for Africa Command, AFRICOM and EUCOM. And so Panzer Kaiser, it was actually a panzer base in World War II that the U.S. forces captured and said, "Oh, we're going to keep this." And so we, kept it for 80 years. But he was apparently involved with drone operations and was providing direct support into Ukraine. So the thing we have to look at here is, and the FBI said, "Oh, they're not connected. Nothing to see here. Move along." I don't believe the FBI, if they said the sun was rising in the east, I'd have to check it out for myself. The FBI is no longer worthy of any trust whatsoever, in my view. They are a discredited political partisan organization and have engaged in pure partisan politics and have abandoned the commitment to actually being blind when it comes to serving justice. They got always one eye open, seeing who do they have to please. They've covered up evidence in the past over the last 8 years, suppressed evidence, manufactured evidence, lied about things. So, they're saying, "Yeah, there's no connection between these two guys." How do they know? They haven't had enough time to establish that. What we do know is that between Jabbar in New Orleans and Matthew in Colorado Springs, they both use the same app to rent cars. People say, that's just a coincidence. Yeah, maybe it is. But I'm not a big believer in coincidence. Particularly when the two people wind up carrying out acts of violence within 6 hours of each other, 8 hours of each other. Again, this sudden transformation of Jabbar from meek, mild IT tech working in the U.S. Army, and remember, he got out of the U.S. Army after 10 years. Served in the reserves, but he didn't have a retirement package. And apparently, he also was trying to work as a realtor and was not too successful at that. I don't know what switch flipped in his brain, but you also got to ask, where was he getting his money from? He supposedly was not doing well financially, yet he goes out and rents a electric truck and then drives. It's okay. I'm moving from Houston to New Orleans. There's a lot that's not clear here, because they said, well, he's born and raised and lived in Houston, but then they show this apartment, and that's sort of another story. The one reporter who gets access to that apartment to focus on his Islamic roots she is a committed American Israeli Public Affairs Committee supporter, pure Zionist. She's the only one that gets access to it. Nothing strange there. No, nobody's trying to use the media to manipulate public opinion. Nothing like that at all. Look, here's ISIS. This guy's got a black flag. Yeah, they hung it upside down so he couldn't read Arabic. Meanwhile, 2 weeks prior, the United States says, "Oh, that al-Jilani, that guy currently involved with Syria. Yeah, he was number 2 in ISIS, and he set up al-Nusra, and he's been the head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham for the last 7 years, and we got a $10 million reward on his head because he's been cutting heads off of people. He's a good guy. He's our man." I mean, at some point, somebody's got to throw the flag on all this bullshit. Excuse my language. But it's like, well, which is it? Is ISIS our friend today? Where the CIA has used them. They've sent money to them, whether directly or indirectly. They provided training, whether directly or indirectly. And then yet we want to claim that they're our diehard enemy. Now, I personally believe that ISIS is a real threat that ought to be dealt with. And that the true believers in ISIS are brokering no compromise with anybody. They're not ones to sit down and say, hey, let's talk, let's sing a kumbaya, let's get along. So what you're looking at here is we're trying to give us a narrative to go by. No connection here whatsoever. If you ask me, I think that this guy out in Colorado Springs, the Green Beret, it has something to do with Ukraine. And he may have been put up to it by Ukrainians. I cannot rule that out, nor should we rule that out. Now, here's the really odd thing. This Shamsuddin Jabbar, this guy had no training in explosives, minimal training with firearms, just by virtue of his, his MOS, what his career was in the Army. And yet he builds two pretty sophisticated improvised explosive devices. I call them sophisticated because he sets them around and they're going to be remotely detonated. Some people say, oh, I can go on the internet and I can do that. Nonsense. Nonsense. The ones who say that are going to be, they'll be like that congressman out of Florida, Brian Mast, who was an explosive ordnance disposal officer in the Army and blew off his legs through his own incompetence and failure to follow good protocol. And then here's this Green Beret guy. Now, he is trained with weapons, a variety of pistols, rifles, shotguns, and explosives. And over his career, over that 18 years, you guarantee he knows how to build some sophisticated bombs. And he's got fireworks and gas cans in the back of his vehicle. And then the other thing here is they saying, oh, he shot himself before the bomb went off. How does a dead guy detonate a bomb? That's the problem. What? He had a dead man switch? Maybe. He lit a fuse? Maybe. It was on a timer? Possible. But again, we don't have any explanation for this. So don't sit there and tell us that, yeah, he shot and killed himself before the bomb went off and the car was consumed with fire. Except they found his ID badge, which was still intact. It didn't melt. Yeah, this all makes sense. It's all so clear. And he was a big Trump supporter, which is why he drove his Tesla filled with the things that could explode to the Trump Tower. He wanted to provide fireworks for Mr. Trump. I don't know. So yeah, I'm skeptical throughout. You gotta look at these connections, and I step back and say, we already know, without a shadow of a doubt, that on January 6th, the FBI put more than 20 undercover confidential informants into the crowd at the U.S. Capitol with instructions to create chaos, to try to provoke the crowd into violence in order to create a predicate crime so that they could go after Trump supporters. There's one video that has now surfaced of this one guy that's been arrested. And they take him into a side door of the U.S. Capitol. And when they get in there, they get him out of the handcuffs. And then he's fist bumping with one of the officers. Hey, man, we fooled them. He was one of the FBI informants. There was others. I'm sure this guy out of Arizona, was his name, Ray. He was. You could see him on, hey, when we get to the Capitol tomorrow, let's storm it. We got to go in. And yet, when they came to time to indict people, he only got indicted belatedly after a lot of people raised issues about it. And then for him, it's just a slap on the wrist. He did no hard time in prison. So we already know that the FBI is quite willing and able to do anything, including violate the law, engage in criminal conduct to stop the presidency or to stop Donald Trump. So you asking me, am I making a wild conspiracy? No, I'm just raising, we know from past evidence that's what the FBI has done. So it's worth the question, are they trying to do it again? Because, supposedly the FBI just right after this bomb went off on Bourbon Street, this guy, the guard ran people over, started shooting. The FBI was right on the scene immediately. At 3 o'clock in the morning, they've got all the agents up saying, hey, we're just sitting around waiting for something to do. Meanwhile, they didn't get to the suspect's house. The New York Post got to the suspect's house before they did. So, just a lot of odd, things that don't appear to add up on the surface. Need to be questioned.
Larry, it seems that the way that they're trying to connect this guy, Shamsuddin Jabbar, to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, do you think do they have any sort of agenda for the Middle East?
Yeah, well, again, that's what's so strange about all this. On the one hand, the United States, with Great Britain and the Turks, were providing funding to HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. That, that organization emerged in 2017, and that was when it was first listed in the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Counterterrorism annual report on terrorism. And it's always been, and since from the last 7 years, it's been listed as one of the top 10 most active groups in carrying out terrorism, attacks on civilians for political purposes. And its roots, again, Al-Jawani, who's a Syrian, who's a Saudi Arabian, not a Syrian, he was a leader in al-Nusra. And al-Nusra was directly involved with what I call the false flag chemical weapons attacks in Syria, where in 2013, the Obama administration tried to claim it was the Syrian army and Syrian government that was carrying out sarin gas attacks on the Syrian rebels. Nonsense. That was al-Nusra. They staged it to make it look like it was the Syrian government. It was al-Nusra. Who's the leader of then? Oh, yeah, that would be al-Jawani. And before that, he was a senior guy within ISIS. So on the one hand, the United States government willingly, knowingly works with these extremists. But when it's convenient, man, we trot them out, say, oh, these are the guys we got to stop. Now, I'm not at all suggesting that the ISIS folks are a contrivance, that they're just, an artificial organization. They're not. Do they have people that are associated with ISIS, working with ISIS, that are being used as tools of the West? Yes. I think that goes without denial. You even got Jake Sullivan writing that in a cable that was released via WikiLeaks back in 2012, when he was carrying water for Hillary Clinton, citing how ISIS was with us in our fight in Syria. And, look at this. In Syria, we're fighting against the regime of Bashar al-Assad. And al-Assad, I'm not saying he was a great guy or a humanitarian, but he did try to protect the rights of the Alawites and the Christians and the Jews that were still in Syria, and as well as try to, he was not out like his father, rounding up a bunch of Sunnis and massacring them. And that's why Iran was along with Hezbollah, fighting against ISIS, because the ISIS guys viewed Shia Muslims, Druze, Alawites as apostates that had to be murdered, had to be killed, exterminated. I mean, this was a sectarian war, and they were uncompromising in that view. So this makeover, there was a TV show in the United States. I don't expect you to know it, but it was called Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and it brought in 4 homosexuals to a straight guy's house to, the guy was a slob and, didn't know how to decorate and didn't know how to dress. And they'd come in and fix him all up and that's what, the United States has done a queer eye for the straight guy with Jelani. He's now wearing a Brooks Brothers suit. Very, very well manicured. You get the fingernails done. I wouldn't be surprised the guy's getting a pedicure, and saying all the right things. And, good God, next thing you know, he's going to bring in Yoko Ono and they're going to start chanting, all we are saying is give peace a chance. It's nonsense. And so then they trot this guy out, Shamsuddin Jabbar, and he's swearing by, he's driving from Houston to New Orleans, and I am Shamsud. I am swearing bayat to Al Qaeda or to ISIS or whoever's in charge now, and I will die for you. Again, this is when you talk to his family's like going, WTF. He was normal last time we saw him, and that was 6 months ago. Who got to him? Who paid him? Questions that need to be asked. And yet the FBI said, nope, nothing to see here. We got it under control. No, he's not connected to anybody. No connections whatsoever. Yeah, it's only been 48 hours, but I'm sure we've scoured all the phones and we've gone through all the bank records and we've looked at all the financial transactions, which we haven't, but it's okay. Like I said, I don't trust the FBI at all. They've lost any prospect that they could be trusted. There's no foundation in their conduct over the last 8 years to say, oh yeah, we trust the law enforcement because they're going to do the right thing. Nonsense.
But we know that Ukrainians are connected with ISIS. They were training these people in Syria.
Yeah, at least HTS. Yeah, direct connection there. So, like I said, it would not surprise me at all that Ukraine is behind this. The intelligence service, the SBU in Ukraine, that they're behind it. That they've got some connection. Because particularly this Green Beret, livers kill, whatever. He was in Ukraine. They're sort of hiding that, but it turns out he was more actively involved in Ukraine as a U.S. military officer. Now they're trying to suggest he was going to be working as, quote, a contractor. That's called sheep dipping. You're no longer in the army. We're working for a contractor, but he's still in the army. So I said they can't figure out, is he active duty? Is he not active duty? Is he based at Panzer and just outside Sindelfingen? That's not a big. That's not a big base at all. That's a tiny little thing. You've got some admin buildings, a couple of barracks buildings, a nice place where people can go shop and eat. But it's not a big going concern. It's just it's a place where you stop over before you get deployed forward.
Laurie, is it going to be, because we talked about it may be connected with this to the situation in the Middle East, but how's right now, how do you find the situation with the conflict in Syria and the view of Israeli government? Do they see that they're gaining some sort of advantage over the situation in Syria?
They've done the equivalent of set their house on fire, and they got rid of their fire extinguishers the week before. Not a good situation. You remember, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago when Assad fell? Everybody, oh, this is a defeat for Russia, a major defeat for Iran. Sorry, I think that's just complete utter nonsense. For what Turkey is faced with, is, yeah, they allowed HTS to take over. Well, who is HTS? It's not a group of Syrian Sunnis who said, we're mad as hell, we're not going to take it over anymore, we're going to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. We want to, that they've got family and tribal ties there. They don't have that because they're foreigners for the most part. Uzbekis, Turkmenis, Tajikis, Dagestanis, lots of Stanis in there, and Uyghurs, Saudis, some Egyptians. The point is, they don't give a damn about Syria. They don't care about the people or the land or the bat. Means nothing to them. And yet Turkey's not able to control them. They're the ones now in charge. And here's Jelani, a Saudi, presiding over Syria. Then to the east, Turkey's trying to, wants to pick a fight with the Kurds, and the United States is sending more troops and building up a new base. So we're gonna try to intimidate the Kurds into not the Turks into not attacking the Kurds. I don't think that's going to end well. So Turkey, instead of really being in control of the process, has now bought itself a big problem. It's sort of like the drug lord that wanted to take over a couple of apartment buildings, thinking, now I get control of those apartment buildings, I'll be able to control the neighborhood and the drug trade. All of a sudden, he gets in those apartment buildings, and man, he's got a bunch of people he can't control. Then he's got to beef up his military personnel or security personnel to try to control it. Meanwhile, Israel, yeah, they're bombing the crap out of Syria. They're destroying all this military equipment. They don't have unlimited military force. It's the point I keep making, that people got to get into the brain. Israel does not have the manpower to go in and secure and control that part of Syria at the same time that they're failing to contain the violence in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. I mean, the Hamas continues to kill, 1 or 2 Israelis a day. And then in the West Bank, up to this point, as long as the Palestinian Authority continues to conspire and collaborate with Israel, they may be able to, they won't have too much of a problem. But if that stops, Israel's got a big problem there. So, this is going to put a real stress and strain on Israeli resources. Now they're saying, oh, this is real defeat for Iran. In the past, Iran was dealing directly with Syrian military intelligence, Syrian military and the intelligence service. It was going through formal channels. Who might have had spies within the Syrian military and the Syrian intelligence community? God, let me think. Oh, that would be Mossad. So Mossad had a way to track and know what Iran was doing because you had this formal governmental structure that existed. That's gone now. Now you're left with these, what I call the historical smuggling routes. And you got families and tribes. They're going to move, they've been moving contraband, illegal stuff through there for generations. And I saw it indirectly firsthand with, and it's not right in this area. It's actually on the other side, but it illustrates the point that back in 1980, when the U.S. military was planning to try to rescue the hostages in Iran, one of the sources of information was a Baluchi rug merchant in southwest Iran that was passing information, and how they passed it, it was coming in rugs. The information was wrapped up in rugs that were sent to a store in Bethesda, in Chevy Chase, Maryland, literally on the street behind me on I lived on Strathmore, and this was on Wisconsin Avenue. I mean, it was literally a block away from me. I didn't know that at the time. I only found out about it after the fact. But that's one way that this whole smuggling network works. Iran's going to be able to smuggle as much as it wants or needs into Hezbollah. And the difference is Israel's going to be blind to it now. They're not going to be able to control it, because before they had some control by virtue of owning assets inside Syrian military intelligence. It's not to say that they can't reestablish some of that, but it's going to be challenging. So when you take all that together, and with all the, the clashes now that are erupting between an Alawite communities, they're starting to fight back against the HTS. And the HTS folks, they don't have the kind of military depth and resources to go in and crush it like the Syrian army did when, Hafez al-Assad, Bashir's dad, went into Homs and killed like 10,000 Sunnis. HTS doesn't have that ability, but, that's going on. You've got elements of the Syrian army that were loyal to Assad that have gone into the mountains that are going to be fighting as guerrillas. And the ones involved with the drug trade, I'm not sure, I don't know enough about who controls that money, but I guarantee you the folks with the drug trade, they're going to do whatever they can to keep the flow going, because it's you get those drugs out, money comes in. And the Beatles were wrong. Money can't buy you love, but man, it can buy you a lot of other things. So Syria is just a big damn mess. And the United States thought it had control over it, and it doesn't. It's really created a wild card that can explode at any moment.
Do you see any sort of chance under which the United States giving up on Kurds?
I'm shocked at you, Nima. Are you suggesting that the United States would betray people who it's promised to fight for? How dare you? I don't know. Ask the South Vietnamese. Ask the Cambodians. Ask the Hmong tribe people. When it's convenient for the United States to cut somebody loose, by God, they'll cut them loose in a heartbeat. So, just as Joe Biden promised the Ukrainians, hey man, we're with you till the end. Ukraine's not going, where are you, America? No, it's the end. So yeah, I could see at some point that the United States will just, like the dealer at the casino doing blackjack, when his turn's up, he goes, hands up, I'm done, goodbye, I'm out. That'll be the United States signal to the Kurds. Hey, it's been nice knowing you. We don't need your damn oil anymore. Yeah, so if I was the Kurds, I wouldn't be counting on the United States is not like a good long-term insurance policy that's going to pay off. I wouldn't trust us. Yeah. Oh, our word is our bond. Yeah, that's what you guys sell junk bonds. That's what you do. Can't be trusted.
And here comes the question: if things go that way, that the United States is just giving everything to be in the hand of Turks,
yeah,
what would that mean for Israel?
Well,
in a long run,
yeah, I mean, it's going to be basically if the Turks secure and settle the Kurdish problem as they view it, Israel's next. You've already had one of the sons of Erdogan talking about next stop Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque. Because there are those within Turkey that still view Israel, Jerusalem, as part of their empire. I mean, let's face it, the Ottomans had control of it for about 600 years. They remember that. The reality is the Turks, through the Ottoman Empire, have had control of Israel, what is now modern day Israel, far longer than any of the Jews who are there, claiming that, oh, this is our land. So, from that standpoint, yeah, the long-term prospects for Israel aren't good. And then look at Russia. Everybody says, oh, this is a major defeat for Russia. Oh, really? Number one, Russia has no more dogs in this fight. And yet, Here's Al-Jilani to Russia. Oh, please, please stay. Don't go away. We love you. Stay. Have our base. The Turks, yeah, hey, stick around, stay in the neighborhood. They, Russia's not being run out. And remember, in the week immediately after all of this, oh, the Russians are fleeing their naval base in Tartus, and they're running from the airfield. It was like, suggesting it was like the United States leaving Afghanistan. Nope. Russia's sitting back. My image of them, they're sitting in one of those recliners, where the feet kick up and the back goes down, eating popcorn, just watching this, going, this is pretty damn entertaining. We get to watch the Turks and the Kurds and the Americans and the Jews all eat themselves alive. And we don't have to worry about bleeding. Let them bleed themselves out.
It seems to me that in their mind, they want to have some sort of balance between the East and the West, and they see the United States and Israel together. On the other hand, they see maybe Turkey and Russia on the other hand.
Who's they?
I'm talking about HTS, Al-Jolani.
Okay. Just want to make sure I understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm old.
Because the way that they're asking Russia to stay in Syria, it seems to me that they're receiving right now, I don't know, too much pressure from the United States and Israel. That's why they're asking Russia to stay in Syria.
Well, actually, I think one of the players behind the scene on this is MBS in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, because Jelani's Saudi roots. And, I think it'd be worth, I haven't done the digging in, but I guarantee that if you do some digging into who's his family, I'm sure they weren't not a bunch of people shining sandals in Riyadh, that, maybe has some pedigree within Saudi Arabia. And so, the Saudis, maybe from the Saudi standpoint, they see trying to create some chaos there in their interest. Now, in the past, the Wahhabi sect within Saudi Arabia has been a major funder, supporter in both the Al-Qaeda and ISIS movements. Now, MBS of late, he's coming out like the metrosexual of the Muslim world, allowing scantily clad women to dance on stage in Saudi Arabia. Are you kidding me? And maybe, he's trying to modernize it and make it more Western. Now, look, the Saudis have always been playing a big game. I had an experience, it's been more than 20 years ago. I was traveling with a friend and mentor at the time, Pat Lang. And Pat had been the U.S. defense attaché in Saudi Arabia. He'd also served as the defense attaché in Yemen. He'd set up the Arabic program at West Point and taught it in the initial days. And then later was head of the Middle East division of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So a very smart guy. And we were meeting with this Saudi who is a prominent businessman. And on the outside, very, very devout Muslim and, very strict religious guy. Go to this restaurant, man. He's opening up $500 bottles of wine. Hey, drink this. Party. This is quite the revelation that a lot of these Saudis, once they're out of the limelight, man, they're into the hedonistic pleasures that Allah frowns upon. So as I say, they pay a lot of lip service to some of the tenets of Islam that they claim to uphold. And so, so you got some true believers within Islam and within the Saudi circles. And, if they decide to turn upon people like MBS, who the United States and the West is, sort of banked upon, and Russia to a lesser extent as well. What happens if MBS gets assassinated and that there's a genuine upheaval and this shift to the hard right in Saudi Arabia, then all of a sudden life's going to get a lot more interesting. Less like, Israel's counting on the fact that it can make a deal with MBS still. Now, over the last 6 months, MBS has said, nope, no deal unless there's a Palestinian state. We'll see if he sticks with that. The fact that he could abandon his word, oh my God, an Arab leader who's duplicitous, how could that be?
In your opinion, does Turkey want a Palestinian state?
Let's not say what does Turkey want. What does Erdogan want? Erdogan wants to be the new Ataturk. He wants to be the new guy that brought back the Ottoman Empire. And if securing a Palestinian state gets him that status, and by God, that's what he's going to do. And if throwing the Palestinians overboard is going to get him that status, he'll do that too. He does not give a damn about the Palestinians. They can die for all his lip service. Oh, Israel's got to stop the genocide. Meanwhile, here, Israel, have some more oil. Keep up the genocide. The Palestinians mean nothing to Erdogan. Unless it serves Erdogan's own purpose in cementing his legacy as the Ataturk of the 21st century.
And the situation between Israel and Hezbollah right now, it seems that Hezbollah has given some sort of deadline to the Lebanese government. In 60 days, they're gonna deal with the Israeli behavior in the southern part of Lebanon.
Well, I'm not sure that that 60 days going forward. I thought this initial ceasefire had a 60-day limit on it. And at the end of that expiration, and that may be this week or next week when it expires. And Israel has repeatedly violated that ceasefire. Now, they've gone on the assumption that Hezbollah has been crippled and can't fight back, and that Hezbollah's line of communications in terms of support from Iran is completely broken. Again, I don't believe that. I could be wrong, but what Iran, while they relied upon Syria for both moving and storing weapons, that that was both it was a double-edged sword. That there's some good to it, but there's some danger and risk to it. And as we've talked about, the risk was, you get to the extent that the Syrians are penetrated by Israeli or U.S. or British intelligence, then the enemies of Iran know exactly what Iran's doing. So you move it, get rid of that and move it into a different chain where you're dealing with people that are less likely to be controlled by Israel, U.S. or U.K. And so then you can continue to supply the weapons, and there'll be some surprises for Israel. Point is, Israel does not have the military capability to defeat Hamas. They haven't yet, and control the West Bank, and go into southern Lebanon and control Syria in the Golan Heights. They don't have that. They've got limited military resources.
The way that things are going in the United States, do you think that Donald Trump would be dealing with the foreign policy or mostly with the domestic policy?
Yes. One of the initial reactions to these terrorist attacks in New Orleans and Las Vegas, and I'm calling the one in Vegas as well a terrorist attack. The initial reaction was, oh, see, we got to tighten up our southern borders. And just go, well, wait a second. These had nothing to do with illegal immigrants. Now, I'm not saying we don't need to tighten up the southern border, but this is something different. The pressure for Trump, he's got a full plate that's loaded with both domestic and foreign. And the risk, I think the risk he faces is that he could get bogged down very quickly on the foreign side. Take the war in Ukraine as the sort of number one threat. Trump promised he'd have that done in 24 hours. Well, that's not going to happen. And Russia's not going to come rushing out saying, "Oh, great, Donald Trump's in. Let's negotiate with him. Let's negotiate with the guy who actually helped arm Ukraine when he was president, so they could attack us. Yeah, we want to deal with him." Trump doesn't have anything to offer. The only thing Trump has to offer them is we'll stop supplying Ukraine with weapons and we'll lift the economic sanctions. Then Russia say, "Okay, you're willing to do that? We got something to talk about." Barring that, I don't see Russia being of any mind to discuss anything with the United States unless those two things are on the table. And giving Russian assets back that the U.S. has stolen. And, the U.S. says, "No, we're not going to do that." Russia said, "Fine, we're going to go on beating the hell out of Ukraine and out of you. We're going to bleed you dry. And there's not a damn thing the United States, can do about it." So then Trump looks weak. Or Trump could get sucked in. Israel's may decide it's time to launch a strike on Iran. And then when, if they've miscalculated, which I believe they are, and Iran is able to thwart the attack and then strike back and do serious damage to Israel, then Trump's going to be under pressure to retaliate and go after Iran, expanding a war. All of this while Iran, what is it? Today's the 3rd. So in 14 days, 2 weeks from today, Iran's going to be in Moscow with Pezeshkian and Putin signing that sort of called a mutual defense treaty. That puts a different spin on what's going to happen. So I don't see how there's going to be a lot of temptation for Trump to get involved internationally, and yet the problems that are here in the United States, he's promised to kick off immediately with getting the border under control, starting the deportations. We'll see if he does that, and there's still a lot that could go wrong. Mike Johnson, if he's not immediately elected as speaker, you may have trouble getting the election for Donald Trump certified in the House of Representatives. And they could end up delaying Trump's inauguration on the 20th. So we're looking at some potential for some real chaos here in the United States. It's not over at all.
And do you see that the process that Keith Kellogg is talking about would help Donald Trump in the way that they're talking about it right now? Because after all, it doesn't seem that they see the whole process as a bargaining situation for Donald Trump. But it doesn't seem to be that way in the mind of Russians.
So it's winter time, it's cold outside, and you're standing outside in the snow. All you have on is your underwear. You need to negotiate to get a pair of clothes and some shoes. But it's inside the house and you're knocking on the door. What's your leverage? How? Why would the people inside that house who are nice and warm want to open their door and haggle with you? Do you have any money? Do you have something that they need inside? That's Donald Trump's position. Trump's naked in the snow with respect to Russia. Russia does not need a single thing that the United States has to offer. However, Russia would be happy to entertain, end all of your aid to Ukraine so this fighting stops now, lift the sanctions on us, and give us our damn money back. Then we can talk. Then we're in a position we can negotiate. Okay, how do we move forward? How do we actually build a relationship of mutual respect, mutual security? But unless you're willing to do that, your Kellogg plan means nothing, meaningless. I don't, I think, frankly, if Putin went for something like that, that would actually pose a risk to Putin being able to stay in office, I think. I think the rest of the Russian establishment would say, wait a damn minute. We've been bamboozled and shaken down and deceived so many times by the West, and you're falling for it again?
Considering the situation, Larry, between Ukraine and Slovakia, Fitzo, in your opinion, the way that Ukraine is cutting off the Russian gas, are they seeing this as a policy of Ukrainians and Zelensky, or they really believe that it's coming from Washington? Because right now, the way that they're talking about it, seems that they're trying to say it's Ukraine that's behind this sort of behavior. But we know, after all, the Biden administration and their policy is behind all of this. How do they want to see this? How do they want to see this? I'm not talking about the reality.
Yeah. Well, cui bono, who benefits? Let's see. U.S. natural gas exporters, they benefit. But see, part of the problem there, and I'd want to go back and look at the contracts, because a lot of those contracts are done 6 to 12 months out. So it's not like, you can say, okay, we're going to stop buying Russian gas today and we're going to buy U.S. gas tomorrow. Well, a lot of that gas has already been committed, unless Ukraine already made a deal a year ago or 6 months ago, so that this was planned, that this was in court. And so the odds are that this was planned and coordinated with Washington. Now, it certainly doesn't, it hurts Slovakia, to a lesser extent Austria, Hungary, but it hurts them. It will potentially benefit U.S. gas exporters, gas producers, but it's going to devastate Europe in terms of higher prices for energy. It's a nuisance or an annoyance for Russia, but it's not a major blow. They'll figure out other ways to get gas to people. They'll just have to pay more for it. And, Russia's happy to sell it to them. This is one that really does damage to Ukraine, though. If Fitzo follows through and says, okay, you're cutting off our natural gas, fine. You don't get any more electricity. And Ukraine right now is dependent on electricity coming out of Slovakia, because the Russians have knocked out so much of Ukraine's own ability to produce and generate electricity.
Larry, when it comes to Germany, how do you see Elon Musk's policy and the way that he's trying to influence the policymakers in Germany? It seems that he's totally supporting AfD or AfD, Alternative for Germany.
Mm-hmm. It's certainly bringing attention to AfD. But see this, what we're seeing throughout Europe is, and the way the language is, the language used to present the issue to those of us still in the United States. It's as if AfD is this big popular movement. It's not a big popular movement. It's got maybe 35% support. Now, but it's got more support than any of the others. What the reality of Germany is right now is it's a fractured society. It does not have any coherent vision. It's not unified at all. And so with that lack of unity, what you get is chaos. And the chances that they're going to, rally around AfD, you've got a big split. You've got elements on the, what we used to call the left, the Green Party, who are as much supporters of the war as some of the hard right-wing parties. This Merz character, they want to give Ukraine more missiles, and risk a war with Russia. So we've really got a confused situation in Germany, and in fact that's being reflected across Europe. That's the problem. There is no unity. You've got minority parties, which means you're not going to get any kind of decisive decisions made in the near term. And I think you have disappeared. Let's follow up on that then. I'll wait for you to show back up here that Germany's economy was sort of a centerpiece for the European Union in terms of being a player on the international stage. And why the Green Party was so determined to destroy, let's call it Germany's energy independence. Germany had nuclear power plants. Germany, by virtue of buying cheap gas out of Russia, was able to get something of a competitive advantage by maintaining its own industrial capability and providing German workers with good jobs. And the fact that the Green Party now was so intent upon destroying the, let's call it the traditional energy sector, and moving to this fantasy Greenland, green energy construct, is that as a result of all of this, they have now dismantled their nuclear power capability. They stood aside while the United States blew up and destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline. And with that, Germany is now faced with having to buy more expensive natural gas from overseas. But who wins out of that? The United States. That's where the United States didn't have the interests of the German people or the German nation at heart in any of this. This is all about serving the interests of the United States. And Germany is learning to its detriment that it has lost out with German industries shutting down. Both BMW and Volkswagen are cutting jobs. So with all of that loss, and some of those industries are moving to the United States. So it means that Germany is becoming increasingly weak. I see that Nima is back now. I was doing a monologue here. Gee, it looks like you lost power.
Yeah, we have some sort of problem. It's a heavy rainy, situation.
Okay, well, yeah. Oh, well, while you were gone, I was saying, Nima sucks. He's a liar. No. No.
Okay. Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us.
Coffee, follow me.